You may begin.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here this morning for the NIAA Rules, Regulations, and Policies Committee meeting for Monday, March 2nd. We will go ahead and call this meeting to order at 9:01. I'm going to do roll call. Reggie Farmer.
Here.
Cy Frederick.
Here.
Jonathan Grandy.
Here.
Tammy Habig.
Here.
Jim Pace.
Here.
Michelle Nichols.
Here.
Ryan Sims. Pamela Sloan.
Here.
Rollin Stallworth.
Here.
Myself. Timothy Jackson.
Here.
And Neil Rombardo.
Here.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Item 3, public comment. This time provides an opportunity for citizens to address the committee about any matter not on the agenda. Items raised during this portion of the agenda cannot be deliberated or acted upon. Should a member of the public wish to speak on a matter not listed on the agenda, it is asked that said person please complete a green public comment card and submit it to the committee chair prior to the opening of this item. Members of the public who have submitted public comment by email will have their email read into the record. A limit of 3 minutes per person and/or 5 minutes for the spokesperson of a particular group may be imposed. It is requested that comments be directed to the committee as a whole. Comments that are determined to be irrelevant, repetitious, offensive, inflammatory, willfully disruptive, or deemed to be personal attacks will not be permitted. I don't have anybody that is speaking for public comment outside of what's already on the agenda. I have not had anything submitted, so unless there's anybody else in here. I know we do have somebody for public comment that is live with us, but it is for a specific item. Let's see, I have something in the chat. Trying to get over there.
Mr. Sims has joined you.
Thank you. Sorry, just opening the chat. Okay. Oh, it was just Rollins. Okay. So I'm just going to move on, and we do have several public comments specifically for item 6 that we will get to. Okay, item 4, approval of the March 2nd, 2026 meeting agenda. Looking for a motion to approve today's agenda, and I would be looking for it to be flexible just in case we need to move out of order for any reason.
I'd like to approve the agenda for today with an open format.
Thank you.
Rollin Stallworth.
This is Pam. I'll second.
Thank you, Pam. Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. All right, we'll move on to item 5, approval of the September 3rd, 2025 meeting minutes. That was our last meeting, which begins on page 5 and goes through page 9. Hopefully you had a chance to read through that, make sure everything looks good. I know it was quite a while ago, but I'll just kind of go through that briefly here. Did anybody have any issues with it? Anything that needed to be updated or changed? Okay. If not, I would be looking for a motion.
This is Pam. I'll make a motion that we approve the September 3rd, 2025 meeting minutes.
Thank you, Pam. Looking for a second.
Rollin Stallworth, I'll second.
Thank you, Rollins. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, that passes. Okay, moving on to item 6. This is our spirit regulations and policies. Some of them are brand new, some will be updated, or being proposed to be updated, and some regulations are being rescinded. There are several. I just want to make a note that the ones that were highlighted were not originally on the agenda. I just omitted them that was just by accident. But there are several others that were in the spirit section that were being addressed at this meeting. And so prior to starting our discussion on all of these regulations and the proposed new policy for non-competitive spirit, I do want to go through our public comment. We do have someone live. I just want to go over to our participants, make sure he's still here. Okay, Danny Robertson from Green Valley Christian is here to give public comment live, so I would like to give him the platform to do that. Danny, you're going to have 3 minutes. And then I will read a couple others into the record. Just want to make sure, Danny, you're ready.
Yeah, I'm ready. I have it on my other screen, so yeah, I'm going to flip over there so I can read this.
Okay, no worries. Whenever you're ready.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Dana Robertson. I've been the athletic director for GB Christian School for 10 years. I would like to thank the committee for the opportunity to speak on this matter. First off, I'd like to applaud the NIAA for looking at the addition of competitive sports such as lacrosse and spirit. With that said, I'm here for one request and one request only as it pertains to the possible addition of competitive spirit to the NIAA winter sports docket. My request is the NIAA Rules and Regulation Committee reconsider its current stance on spirit athletes participating in concurrent winter sports. For years, spirit student athletes have been able to participate both in competitive spirit season while also having the opportunity to participate in sports like basketball, flag football, bowling, and wrestling. Sanctioning spirit as a sport mid-alignment cycle could significantly impede a school's ability to field teams in the winter season. We would be forcing these student athletes to choose between two sports that they have previously balanced. At the recent NADA conference, the Title IX instructor noted Title IX is a policy of addition, not subtraction. The goal of recognizing more of our student athletes by sanctioning spirit should not be achieved by taking away opportunities from those same student athletes and possibly jeopardizing a school's ability to field winter sports teams. We understand the NIA's goal is to protect the well-being of student athletes. However, given that balance has been maintained successfully for years, I ask that you include a caveat for sanctioning competitive spirit. This would allow spirit student athletes the ability to participate in multiple winter sports, perhaps through a dual sport agreement requiring both approval from both coaches and the school's athletic director. Again, I love the idea of the NIA adding more opportunities for our student athletes, but I just don't want that to be at the cost of a current opportunity that has been allowed for many years. Thank you for your time and everything you do for the support students in Nevada.
Thanks, Danny. Appreciate it. Thank you, Danny. Appreciate it. Sorry, I was still on mute. I don't have anybody else live that I see for public comment, but I do have two other that I will read into the record. The first is from Jacqueline Sorensen, who is a spirit coach for Palo Verde High School. Good morning, committee members. As a CCSD cheer coach for 16 years and former CCSD cheerleader, I'm highly concerned about the safety of my athletes if opting in for the pilot that's been currently submitted by the NIA. A successful advanced program cannot safely form a team in November, choreograph, and be ready to compete in December/January for the winter season. Cheerleading isn't like basketball where a successful point guard can go to any team and transfer and be good on another team. Stunting takes getting used to stunt groups, different flyers, main bases, secondary bases, and back spots to be safe and effective. Tumbling passes have to be practiced over and over again in routines to be safely executed. Most importantly, cheer camps always take place in summer per the companies that run them, NCA, UCA. Camps are where they have stunt safety lessons. This is where stunt groups and coaches learn how to progress safely. These brands do not host camps in November as competitions have already started. It is mandatory to attend camp to qualify for nationals for varsity brands. If our sideline teams have nothing to do with our competition teams, how can comp teams that can't form till November qualify for nationals? Also, registration for nationals takes place in August/September. To register for hotel and travel, how can we do this without knowing who our teams are and how many athletes who have been selected for our teams? Hotels through the varsity brand sell out if you don't book on time. There wouldn't be adequate close hotels to venues if we waited to book till November, or flights when nationals happens in January. JAMS qualification happens on December 1st. No one will be ready to do that. Therefore, comp teams have to form in spring or summer. I beg the board to slow down in pushing for this to be called a sport this coming season and properly prepare with regulations and rules that reflect cheer as a sport like other states that have done so. And I have one other, I just want to make sure she didn't hop on. I know she was going to try. I'm not seeing Deb in here. Deb and I discussed a couple things early this morning. She did write a statement. I'm going to read this. This is Deb Dowdy-Solari, our current NIA Spirit Interpreter and Commissioner. And so I'll read through this, and then as we get into our discussion, I'll talk a little bit about our conversation we had after she submitted this statement. Good morning. Thank you for your continued support for moving forward with Spirit becoming a sport in the great Silver State, Nevada. As a longtime coach and Spirit interpreter in our state, my boots are on the ground with Nevada coaches, and I am thrilled to say I feel I have a great working rapport with them. Coaches from all over the state reach out to me often about Spirit-related topics, ranging from how to run their Spirit programs safely, safety questions, directing them to sanctioned competitions, and also stunt legalities. Sanctioning Spirit as a sport has brought much communication. This is what I know. One, coaches want this change and realize most things will stay the same with their programs, but there will be some challenges and changes they realize they will need to work through. Two, I would like to reiterate, coaches will choose their competitive teams. As in the past, coaches will choose the best athletes to represent their school. The athletes who will be up to the task will be ones that attended camp, cheered football season, will cheer basketball season, and also may compete for the school. Safety and skill progression is not an issue. The athletes will be ready. Three, coaches can still present Coaches can still present choreography and training during the fall non-competitive football season, just as we always have. All coaches know rosters ebb and flow with grades, athletes moving in and out of the school, skill readiness, etc. The formal tryout and rostering of the best athletes will be made official in the winter season. Two things I would like to see added to the non-competitive and competitive guidelines and rules are twofold. Coaches need to be required to attend the Spirit Annual Guidelines Rules meeting in July, August. Annual changes to the NFHS rules are rolled out. In Spirit, there are always plenty of changes. These changes are voted on by Spirit interpreters like me from all the states. Suggestions of new rules also originate from the state interpreters who have contact with the coaches from various states. I feel it should be in there as this meeting directly impacts safety for the non-competitive and the competitive teams. Two, for non-competitive, I believe we should include language prohibiting tryouts until after spring sports conclude. The middle school principals prefer them later to keep their students focused and not worrying about fundraising and tryouts for a high school team that does not begin for months. The high school spring sports coaches also want their athletes focused in their spring sport and not the next year's Spirit team. Three, in addition to cheer and dance safety course, there's an NFHS coaching cheer and dance course for $50. It is a great course, but if we want to align with other sports with coach requirements is what we are requiring enough. I believe making Spirit a sport and bringing back our state championship will lift our Spirit numbers even higher than they are. Thank you for allowing me always to throw my 2 cents in. And so I did have a conversation with her after we talked a little bit about some of this, and I will bring up those points as we're going through and talking about the different regulations that we have, because some of those we kind of cleared up in our conversation this morning. So we'll go ahead and start our discussion on Spirit. I also have several issues, FAQ type questions that have come to me over the past couple weeks since we have put out, our agenda, and we put out the guidance document to our schools to kind of give them a heads up in case they didn't listen to the board meeting that it has been sanctioned as a sport and that we are working through the regulation process where all the details are going to be worked out. There's obviously been lots of different concerns, questions. So I will also share some of those as we go through this. But I just want to kind of start with these regulations, taking a look at them and give you an understanding of where the committee and the NIAA are coming from with these changes. And one thing that I want to make very clear is that there is a concern with Title IX. If we're going to be sanctioning a sport as a sanctioned sport, there are certain guidelines and points that need to be hit to even begin the conversation of qualifying as a sport. And my view in this is that if we are going to continue with the sanctioning of Spirit, and we want it to be a sanctioned sport, that we need to meet those requirements. Otherwise, I think what we're doing is we're limiting an activity that was operating for a very long time in a certain way in our state very successfully, and we're limiting their ability to do what they do if we're not looking at kind of the whole picture. Either they need to be a full sport, as Title IX would classify them, as all of our other sports are, or we continue to let them do the things that they're doing and maybe find an alternative like sponsoring a state championship. So I'll kind of bring some of those in as we talk about this as well, but just want to front load with that as well. So I'm going to go over these, but I want this to kind of be an open conversation. So please use the hand raise button or just chime in, or if you have anything to talk about as we go through. I will go one by one with these so that we can have a discussion about each individual regulation. So the first section that you see here are all regulations that reference Spirit, cheer, or dance in some way. So the first is our definition of Spirit. Originally, this basically included all of these different things. So cheer, stunt, dance, drill, pom, mascot group, which are all kind of encompassing of Spirit. We felt that because we are trying to sanction it based on NFHS rules and what they constitute as the the quote unquote sport of spirit, that we just limit that to say any cheer or dance. And of course, there's going to be different events in different areas within those two entities where there is pom and there's drill and there's other things, but just cheer and dance, limiting the definition to those two things, I think is a bit clearer when we're talking about sanctioning it. And then obviously we needed to include that they engage in competitions, and that is both in and out of the state. The reason I put in and out of the state there, and one of the questions that came up a lot is, well, we don't want to sanction our sport. We're just going to continue to do sideline, and then we'll go compete in non-NIAA sanctioned contests out of state. That's not an option. If your team is competing, whether it's in or out of state in any way as a representation of your school, they are operating as a sanctioned team. So want to make sure in the definition that was very clear that if you are a spirit squad based on our regulations as a sanctioned sport, this is what it looks like. Any questions on the definition, comments on that?
Is there going to be a definition for what a non competitive spirit squad looks like? Are they going to put some changes in there to say and explain the differences between the two, or are they just going to continue to operate the way they operate now and not participate in, say, this quote unquote sanctioned sport spirit squad?
Great question. So we talked a lot about this. Our view of this is that we are not overseeing sideline. Our state has meshed the two for a long time. Our rules really were meant to be about the competitive side of cheer, even though it wasn't sanctioned. And so we are not going to have anything about non-competitive spirit in our actual NACs. What we did create, because we feel there is some concerns with safety and just minimum requirements for schools to operate and some guidelines, we did create a policy for non-competitive that will be outside of the NAC. That is the very last thing that you'll see in this section for spirit that we'll review. And so it talks, basically about what a non-competitive team is, but the definition is basically anybody that isn't competing. So there's just no competition. It's just your school-based team.
Okay, great. Good. I think that's very, very important. I think that should almost go to the front of this regulation, or to right before this, instead of at the end. But that's fine and dandy, long as it's in there.
Yeah,
so the policy
won't be, so the policy will just be a policy that's like on our website. It will not be in the regulations, and we felt that was important because we want to keep them very separate, that our regulations are only about this particular definition. Everything else would operate on the school or district basis.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Any other questions, conversation about the definition, thoughts? Okay, I'm not hearing anything. So I'm going to move on to the next regulation, NEC 385B 376. This regulation, Bart and I actually talked quite a bit about this separately. This regulation basically was in place to let schools know that your students can participate in things outside of the school. But it's also has some language in there about it being like approved by the school. And then the last part is kind of saying that, you wouldn't constitute in subsection 2, a pupil is not required to substitute games, contests, or meet to participate in that particular out of school event. So it's kind of talking about club programs here and just the ability to participate in two things at the same time. We felt this regulation no longer really has a purpose. We also are looking to reduce the number of regulations that we have when necessary. We don't feel it's necessary to have a whole regulation that says this. We don't govern club, and so therefore you're allowed to do club, and it does not affect your high school eligibility. But spirit is linked to this because it has, member of a spirit squad or a team in there to kind of say you can do your school related spirit or school related team while also doing something not school related. We just felt it wasn't necessary to have this regulation anymore, because if it's not, we don't govern it. So if it's not something we govern, you can do it at the same time. And so that was the reason for removing this, is once we reviewed it, because it had the word spirit in it, we were looking at it, there's really no need for this anymore. There is a regulation a little bit further down where we talk about Danny's public comment, where spirit students can participate on a winter sport, and that will be a conversation when we get there. Currently, we're recommending removing that. Obviously, we've said if it's going to be a sanctioned sport, like any other sanctioned sport, you can only play one per season. So that's a different regulation than this one, but it does sound a little similar. So I just want to make sure you understand there's also a separate one about that regulation later on. Any questions about this and the just need to kind of reduce where we can? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to move on. So those were just two regulations outside of the spirit section that mention spirit. The next several regulations that we will go through are all within a section for spirit squads. So we know that all of our sanctioned sports have their own individual section. We would maintain a section for spirit, but we would need to make some updates to that. And so the first regulation here, many of our sports do have something related to the sport following the provisions of the NFHS rulebook. And so we wanted to keep subsection 1 that mentions that to make sure that our spirit squads that are competing are, doing so based on those rules and in any period that they are competing in our NIAA sanctioned or any sanctioned event. The rest of this regulation is really talking about the schools establishing requirements for eligibility. So like a school is allowed to have a certain rule for that student to have eligibility to be a part of the spirit squad. That is already part of another regulation where schools are allowed to go above and beyond the association's regulations. But we also wanted to be sure that we remove this because it's not only repetitive, but it also makes it sound like you don't have to follow the association rules when it comes to eligibility, where that would no longer be the case. If it's a full sanctioned sport, it would follow all of our normal transfer regulations, residency, guardianship, academic eligibility. All of those items would now just be followed under our normal 700s regulations where every sport follows. So we felt that was important to remove that section there. And then here just kind of talks about the competition being sanctioned by the association. And then it says is not a sanctioned sport for the purpose of this chapter. So obviously it will now be a sanctioned sport. So that needed to be removed. And also we have an entire regulation about sanctioning of contests that would just, again, be followed by all of our sports. So we didn't feel it was necessary to have any language about sanctioning. And you're going to see sanctioning in several spots throughout that we just removed because we have regulations in place for all of our sports for the process for sanctioning competition, tournaments, and the like. So they will just follow the same as all the other sports. Any questions on the removing of 2 and 3 for 550? Comments, questions? Okay, I will move to 552. This just goes over some of the responsibilities of the coach, duration of the season, the tryout, selection of the team. We rewrote a lot of this, so you'll see that at the end of these regulations where we rewrote what that's going to look like. But essentially, it's going to, it doesn't need to be spelled out in regulation exactly when the tryouts are, because if they're a sanctioned sport in the winter, that will follow sanctioned sports in the winter and what those look like. I think this regulation in particular is probably one of the ones that I've gotten the most feedback from schools and from coaches about. They obviously don't want to fall within the winter sports solely based on, the tryouts being in November, just like all the other winter sports. They feel that there is a lot of safety concerns with this. Not only that, as you heard in the public comment, a lot of the safety courses that the event producers put on that are required to go to their events are done in the summer camp, and they feel they can't require students to go to that. How are all their students that they're going to try out in November going to be ready when they don't necessarily have to go to this? I think there's some ways around that, so we can talk about that too as well. But I just want to kind of reiterate that this is that one regulation where we're talking about when tryouts can happen. And right now, if we remove this language, the tryouts just follow our general regulation about the seasons. And that general regulation about the seasons is that the Board of Control determines the calendar prior to, the seasons. And for each of the seasons where you have your tryout date, you have your state championship date, and that's the season. Removing this would remove that ability for Spirit to require things outside of the winter season. So I want to open this one up just for conversation, and then I will bring in some of the feedback that I've heard from schools, and then some of my solutions that I've kind of talked about with a lot of these schools that have had the concerns. So anybody have anything to add or feedback that they've heard?
Kate, you want us to talk about the proposal to keep it in to have it align with the winter? Yes, right now is that
Yeah,
what
because
you're
removing this would basically just put them in the winter season, and that would just put them in the standard format that we have for all winter sports if we remove this whole regulation.
Yeah, I mean, I think speaking from a school who does try to compete nationally, it's a big concern for my cheer coaches because like the public comment said, so much of their work is done in spring leading into summer and then registering in September. Because it is a costly trip and it is one that requires a lot of preparation, it's not something that can be done in a 3-month period. And so I think from my cheer coach's perspective, the number one thing is a safety thing, and then there's a quality of product too. I think that leading right behind that. And then I think the public comment, like I said, makes a good point about the logistical part of it as well. And I think I'm afraid that if we do this, what we're doing is we're setting up schools for failure in regards to trying to follow the rules, right? Because you're going to have some schools who are going to constantly feel like they're skirting the rules or trying to find a way around the rules in order to keep doing what they're doing. And I don't think anybody wants to do that. I don't think anybody's trying to circumnavigate the rules.
Thanks, Ty. Tammy, your hand's up.
Again, I always start this off with I don't know a whole lot about cheer. So I'm in the process of learning more. How does cheer differ when it comes to stuff like intramurals? Because, a lot of our sports that are winter sports, they don't start in November. They run intramurals throughout the whole year. Yeah, it's not their team, but how would cheer fit into that? Someone help me out understand that.
So unless somebody else wants to speak on this, I will give, this is kind of my response when I've had these conversations with people about this being their concern, because this is one of the biggest concerns we've heard. They will operate the same as any sanctioned sport. So they can do anything in the out of season time frame that they see fit. And the only thing is the communication piece. This is where you're going to get into issues with parents, is if it's communicated in any way that, listen, if you don't come to this, this, and this, you're not going to make the team in November. That can be a concern, because by regulation, that's not how we run our sanctioned sports. You can do things in the off season as long as it is voluntary and not required to be not a required mandate to basically make the team. So my response to a lot of people that have had this concern is, you can operate outside of this. You can say, listen, if you plan to try out in the winter season, there is a camp this summer. It is highly recommended that you attend, because you'll be learning a lot of important skills. There's also going to be a safety course, the stunt safety course that's going to be put on by the school, the event producers, where we're going to compete in their events. If you don't go to that, you may have to find an alternative. And I don't know what that alternative is, and if there even is an alternative, but that may be also a conversation that our state, and Deb and I have kind of talked about this, our state starts to have with these brands, to see if there's any option for a secondary stunt course that they hold in Nevada at some point just prior to, the start of winter season, so that anybody that didn't happen to make it in the summer could do that, at a later time. Because I do know that we've had students, because I've had somebody else reach out about the safety concern, saying, hey, I had a student that didn't come out and do anything until winter season, and they ended up getting injured. And so my thought is, they must have had to have gotten their stunt certification somewhere to even be a part of the program. I don't know the exact answer to that, but I'm assuming that there is or can be a possible secondary way that they could get that approval. But I think the biggest thing would just be, like we do for most sports, we hold a meeting. Anybody that's interested in coming out for that particular sport. Here are some of the things we're going to do in the off season. If you're really going to be serious about this, it's important that you do show up for this. Does not mean if you don't show up that you have no chance of making it, but we're highly encouraging you to be a part of this so that you have all the safety around this, because it is a sport where safety is really, really important. So I think there are some ways around that. To kind of hit on size point with like the routines. I had a school reach out to say, like, for the nationals that they participate in, because the other thing I'm learning is there's multiple national contests. The one that they participate in, they have to submit something. I believe it was in September, to get a bid for, that's like their regionals, I guess, to get a bid to the nationals. And they said, could we still submit something from our school, even though it's not like our set team because it's in September, but just this is what our routine we're planning and what it would look like, plug some kids into spots. Tim and I kind of have a conversation about it. And I said, I don't love it because it could send a message to kids and families like, hey, this is the team. These are the spots that they're going to be in. But that being said, there's a possibility where something like that could work, where you still are able to submit something for nationals prior to the season with just a tentative plan of what that looks like. Now, when it comes to the hotels and the actual kids and the number of kids that you're going to have on your team, that is a concern. Obviously, you're not going to know those numbers until November. So booking all of that's still a concern. I don't know if there's a good solution for that. But to long-winded answer to your question, Tammy, they can still do everything intramural wise out of the season as every other sport. They just can't communicate that it's required to be a part of the competitive team. Other comments? Questions?
Yeah, I think the biggest reason why intramurals doesn't totally fit into the cheer model is because, and I think public comment had mentioned this prior to, the girls that are being in specific spots is a big part of a cheer squad, and a dance squad, to be honest with you. So a lot of times you have to reblock an entire routine if a girl is in a different spot or not there, and that can take a lot of time and manpower to do so. And so, that's kind of what they're doing in the summertime, is getting, and those camps is getting the girls in the right spots and in the spots they need to be in. And so I think that's the biggest issue with that. I think some of the questions that I've had come up about this are, can we just have a different rule for tryouts as opposed to the season start date? Can the season be all year, so you're able to do things with your roster, but then you have a different rule for tryouts? I don't know.
Yeah, and that's a great question. And so this is something I've done some research on. I think a previous public comment, I think it was at our board meeting, mentioned several states. So I did some research on those states and what those look like. The issue is that the majority of those states don't fully sanction Spirit as a sport. They sponsor it. They sponsor a state championship, but they operate in different ways. For instance, Pennsylvania does sanction it. However, they sanction it through 2 seasons. Idaho sanctions it for 2 seasons. I actually talked to Idaho's chairperson, spirit person, and they for instance have a fall and winter season where they can try out, in the spring before, or before the fall season begins. And their fall aspect of Spirit has a sideline requirement and component, and then their winter is their competitive season. And so they operate very similar to how we are talking about, but they sanction it kind of totality as one big Spirit. And they have confirmed with me that they do not qualify under Title IX. So Title IX for Cy Frederick doesn't matter because privates don't get federal funding. However, it does matter for our privates and our publics and our charter schools, our public charter schools, because they do have to pay attention to their numbers. And I know one of the biggest pushes with getting Spirit is, it's going to be great for our girl proportionality numbers. If we do anything outside of what we do for any other sport, it will not qualify automatically. That's a non-starter. So it has to be equal, which is one of the pushes why, if you want to be sanctioned, then you have to follow sanctioned athletic sports. So that's why kind of my my thought and some of that feedback that I'm getting is I'm hearing it all and I'm understanding what everyone's saying. We have two things. We have kind of two options here. We either follow exactly as we want to do for a sport to try to qualify for Title IX numbers, which I know is important to some schools and school districts, or we pull back. We possibly bring this back as a conversation to say, let's just continue to operate and sponsor a state championship, because we can do that. Many states do that, where it's not a sanctioned sport. So therefore there's not that pressure to fall within a certain box of sanctioned sports, but they still have the opportunity for a state championship. And that way they can operate the way that works best for Spirit, because we know it's unique. So again, I'm not here to kind of push that agenda, but I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up that the number of people coming to me with this concern is alarming. And I don't want to be in a position where we're a state that is limiting our students in some way or making us have a safety concern. So while, yes, intramurals is an option, I also understand that if you're missing a piece or the piece changes, that's not ideal. You know, doing intramurals for volleyball for many years, I obviously was plugging and playing kids into positions I felt that fit best. You know, if I just was missing a setter the entire time, it's difficult. And then having to replace that person, put somebody else in there, you know, even in a sanctioned sport where, you know, it's not as vital of a safety concern, even that is challenging. So I can understand the safety side of, if I don't have the right person in the right spot, or I'm missing a person, that might just not work at all for Spirit. So again, a long-winded answer, but I've done a lot of research on this, and you know, those states that were mentioned, they are operating as activities with a competitive aspect. They are not just sanctioned sports. Florida, for instance, direct quote from their stuff says, participation or non-participation in spring competitive cheer shall not be used as a prerequisite for participation in the competitive cheerleading the following year. So like, for instance, they do allow there to be some off-season spring tryout practices. They have 20 practices within the last 30 days of school. That's allowed as a continuation of their previous winter season. So it's just a unique thing that they do. But I can tell you for sure that wouldn't qualify for Title IX numbers, number one, if it's not something that other sports are allowed to do, and they don't require it. So it's still the same as what we would be doing to say, hey, you can do all this stuff in the summer. It just can't be a requirement to make the next year's winter team. So I think, you know, while you look at other states, there might be things that sound great, but they still are not falling within the certain parameters of either an athletic sport, and they may be just operating as an extension of an activity that also has a competitive aspect, which is something we've been doing for years.
Kate,
Yes.
I agree with you 100% with regarding to the difficulties of this. I also want to add that I think we're going to open up Pandora's box a little bit if we allow a new sanctioned sport to come in with different regulations than our current sanctioned sports.
Agreed.
Along with that being said, we have lacrosse on the table. I think we're going to run into some similar problems with lacrosse with regards to club play and sanctioned sport play during their season and the off season. So I am completely in favor of the Spirit squad being a competitive sanctioned sports, but I am completely against opening up Pandora's box and opening up year-round opportunities for them and them only, and not the other sports. I mean, all of our sports, football, basketball, baseball, some are worse than others, but most of them have turned into dang near year-round sports under the restrictions and guidelines that we currently have in place as being a sanctioned sport. I really think cheer will learn how to do that as well, with the opportunities in place. And if they want to be a competitive cheer program, then they will understand and know how to get those things done. Because I can assure you, as an athletic director at a high school for years, and in this position I'm in right now, we have coaches of sanctioned sport teams that do a lot of off-season work under the parameters of what the rules are and should be and followed. So I really think that our organization, and I know Washoe County, we did the best we could in terms of providing information to our cheer squads and our cheer advisors about be careful what you ask for, because there are going to be some parameters and some issues that could completely change the way you currently do things. So that's my 2 cents.
Thanks,
Okay,
John.
I have a question, and I know I probably should know the answer to this since I am sitting at the board meetings.
Mhm.
But to clarify, when it passed to, look at sanctioning, there was no like, we didn't say that we couldn't just sanction a state championship, correct? Like that wasn't taken off the table, right?
So it was when it was proposed to sanction following or sanctioning new sport sanctioning regulation under the pilot
Okay.
program, that would make it a full sanctioned sport. And so that's why we are kind of talking about all these regulations versus just sanction or sponsoring or sanctioning just that event, that state event. That was brought up. Tim did bring it up at the board meeting, but the actual approval, the motion and the approval were for the sanctioning of the sport following that
Okay.
process.
That's
Yeah.
that's what I thought. That's why I was like, wait, this isn't even
Yes.
an option really after what the board told us.
Sure.
Right. It would have to be completely reconsidered. It would have to be brought back to be reconsidered.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just wanted to make sure I was
So, and that's kind of where
remembering.
we're at. So as a committee right now, I'm saying these things because this is the feedback that I'm getting and where I feel it might be a better option to go. But that would be up to the board. So, our job here for the committee is if we're going to move forward with full sanctioning, what is it going to look like and how should it look like? So that's what we have to do is based on that. That's what the board has asked us to do is to, bring back the regulations for full sanctioning as a sport.
Hey, Kate, I think for the record, it would be good to just, to the best of your ability, talk through the benefits of cheer being sanctioned. So when this all started, what is the benefit of us bringing this to the table and getting it sanctioned for the sport, for the girls, for the coaches? Like what are the pros to getting it sanctioned? And then I think that would allow us to kind of look at, are any of those things achieved by just sponsoring a state championship? And if they are all achieved by doing that, then maybe sanctioning cheer isn't needed right now.
Amen.
There may be some things that I'm not aware of as to how sanctioning helps. And so I think it would be good for the record to just, and you don't have to speak specifically on cheer, but like, why does sanctioning help any sport? Like, how does it help? I know for lacrosse, it was an establishing of a history and a regulations and things like that within the state and getting traction. I don't think cheer suffers from traction in the state like lacrosse does or did.
Yeah, and I can't speak exactly to the impetus of this coming to the board. I just know it's been talked about for many years. I think it's twofold, and I don't know if Kristen's on yet, but I might pick on her to talk about because she hears a lot more of this. But what I know for sure is that the state championship was important when we did sponsor it. I again don't know the exact reason why that dropped out and is no longer a thing, but I know having a recognized state championship where schools are recognized, and can then be recognized nationally as the state champion team for Nevada is important. So I think that's one really great thing with sanctioning. Obviously, we also have an option of not sanctioning and still offering that. The second piece, I think, is just the recognition of being an athlete, where some cheerleaders just feel and dancers feel they're not recognized as an athlete because it's not officially sanctioned. So I think that I've heard is part of the reason they would like to be sanctioned is to be treated as athletes and get the respect that other athletes get on campus. But I think I also hear the opposite where they're like, we already feel like athletes. We already feel as if like we know we're athletes. But I think that's part of the reason too. So I think those are probably the two biggest things. But in general, if you're talking sanctioning a sport, I think your point on lacrosse is important. If it's not already established in your state, it's building those programs and getting more kids to want to come out because we're offering it. I think safety is another big thing. Like having it fall under our regulations that will then fall under the NFHS rules. If they're just operating as clubs, we don't necessarily know how that's all operating. So again, to go back to Spirit, I don't think that's an issue because we've already required that Spirit, anybody that's competing in Spirit competition in our state is already following the rules of NFHS. So that's not something that would be new with sanctioning, and just giving it some kind of, format and ability to function in a particular way that's aligned with everything else that's going on in the state. I think that's another benefit to sanctioning a sport. I don't know that fits or is a benefit for Spirit, though. To say is that if that's a benefit for Spirit, I don't think it is, because I don't think it falls under how our other sports operate as easily as something like lacrosse. I personally think there's more cons to changing what we currently do with Spirit than there are pros, especially if there's an opportunity to still give a state championship that would be recognized in our state.
So, Kate, under this current format that we have and that we're going over right now, a school in Washoe County could have an opportunity to be a sideline cheer team with the current guidelines that we have for sideline cheer, and at the same time have a club spirit competition team that competes like they've been doing. Would this prevent them from doing that?
So you're asking if we sanction the sport the way that we're proposing here, if a team can still have a sideline and competitive team?
Yes.
Yeah, they can still have a sideline team that operates as a sideline team. They can also choose not to have a competitive team at all, but just understanding that their sideline team is then school-based only. They can do
Yes.
assemblies, games, and things like that. So there's
Yes.
options in how you operate. The one thing that can't happen is a school can't opt out of competing and then still go compete in other things and just say, oh, we're not going to do NIA sanctioned events. Anything that you are competing in is NIA sanctioned. If it's sanctioned in our state or out of state, we're requiring that it's sanctioned by that state association or the NFHS. So there's no real way around it unless it was a club program completely unaffiliated with your school that has its own, company, insurance, is not operated through your school in any way, shape, or form. They could go compete, obviously, and do whatever they want because that's a club program, just like we have club programs, AU and American Legion, all those things. So those are kind of the options of how you can operate.
Okay. So by sanctioning the spirit team as we are doing now is actually a disadvantage and different from the opportunities that they had previously had of being sideline cheer and now a sanctioned spirit team. They've actually reduced some of their opportunities and actually increased.
Yeah, because we didn't have, a set parameters around their tryouts. We didn't have set parameters around the number of contests that they could do and the season that they could do those contests in. Some, did some earlier, some go into March. There was less confinement on how they actually operate as a competitive team.
Yes.
Not to mention, they also could be a competitive athlete in the winter with an actual sanctioned sport and be on the competitive cheer team, which was Danny's public comment, which for our smaller schools is definitely, a concern that was expressed through their surveys, is that we're going to either lose our competitive team or we're going to lose our girls basketball program or something like that. So that I would say is one of the cons of sanctioning.
And just
so
sorry, Roland.
Those people who were fighting for this sanctioning didn't take any of this into consideration, to me, it looks like, in terms of what real impact would it have on how we currently operate in terms of a sideline cheer program, year-round schedule, and being able to compete nationally as a competitive cheer squad, which they had open reign for all of these years. And if I remember correctly from the presentation from the cheer people several months ago before we even had the vote, I think they were okay with just having everything stay status quo and the NIAA sponsor some kind of a state championship at the end of the year at some point, sponsor that. Was I listening to that by myself and alone at the board meeting? Am I the only one that heard that? Because I do remember them saying, you know, technically all they really initially wanted was a state championship to be recognized by the NIAA or by the state, and that our only problems that we had with it is that we would sponsor it, but it couldn't be called an athletic thing or something about the naming of it. Will somebody help me out on that? Because I know there's been state championships in the past for cheer, and we had no problems with them. And then all of a sudden, those state championships stopped. And now, you know, they were requesting, how do we get those back? Well, you have to be sanctioned. And now I'm understanding that there's a possibility that we can still sanction it, but it just can't be called something. Help me
Yeah.
out on that, Kate.
Yeah. Tim, do you want to chime in at all? I mean, I can give some of what I recall from me.
I appreciate that, Kate. Rollins, you're right on you hit the nail on the head right there. If you remember back at the September board meeting, I think it was, the one thing we had stressed was that this was going to take time to vet all the way out, that we were not believing that this should be rushed in any way, shape, or form. But that was not how the vote went. Obviously, we're at where we're at now. But that was our biggest concern. There are a lot of variables in this that we had not explored. We didn't know what existed exactly, what the format it existed in, and what it looked like, what we wanted it to be here at the end. And now we're getting into this crunch time where we're already into March, and we're still trying to figure out what it's going to look like before they have April tryouts, which is one of the biggest concerns that I've heard. We had a state championship for many, many years in Nevada, but the difference was it was still falling under the activity side of the house. It was sanctioned in our regulations, but it was falling under the activity side. Now, we could continue to do that, but in doing so, that would not force a school to put those kids into the athletic side. It would also then, Kate, correct me if I'm wrong, negate the ability to use those numbers for Title IX.
100%.
So if you want to use Title IX numbers, we have to be in this very, very narrow strip of land over here. And the problem is we are trying to pound not only square pegs into a round hole, triangle, hexagon, and pentagram pegs into a hole, and they just won't fit. So I think that's where we're at right now. We're starting to get to the meat of this matter, and the meat is showing us that we have got a lot of different items on our buffet table. And we can't just go through and pick out the pieces that we like the best and try to make it fit. I believe, and I still believe this, that we could do a state championship like we have done in the past. We could leave everything as it is and explore going sanctioning, but we would need to slow down. And I don't know how well that will be received. We've heard that loud and clear from certain individuals. And the board did say they wanted it ready to go for next year. So we are still moving on that path until such time as we are told not to. Kate, if you want to chime in on any of that I may have missaid or misspoke on.
Yeah. And so we're all into, you know, I think many people, their want with this being sanctioned is the state championship. I don't know if all, some I think do want the full sanctioning for the recognition as an athlete. But I did hear, you know, that there was, we don't necessarily support the sanctioning of Spirit based on the proposal that was provided in the survey, but we may support it if certain things change, like the number of contests, which we've talked about, which we'll get to later on, the season and the tryouts. So I think some people want it sanctioned, but they want it to fit what they feel would be best, like basically keep things status quo, but just call it sanctioned, which doesn't really work because if it's going to be a sanctioned sport, it's got to fit under sanctioned sport rules.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it's hard. I don't know 100%, you know, every single person's desires on what this looks like and what they want. I just know that most people I'm hearing from want to keep things the way they are as far as the format, for safety and for, you know, timing purposes, to get the things done they need to get done in time to compete. And they also want a state championship. So that's what I'm hearing. Sai, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I had a couple questions.
Yeah.
So you used the phrase opt out. Is that the same as going independent? So let's say cheer was sanctioned and they were like, well, we'll just go independent as a cheer team. Can they still compete in the the competitions that are in state?
Yeah, I mean, if you go independent in this case, they're not put in a league, and it's not going to be like a Faith plays Sierra Vista,
Right.
one-on-one, like our other sports kind of operate. It will more be like track and wrestling, where a lot of their competitions are really just their invitationals and their tournaments on the weekends and things like that.
Right.
For Spirit, we're not going to have any of the duels or anything like that. So going independent just means that you are not put in a league schedule, which there's not going to be a league schedule anyways, and that you won't be postseason eligible. So if you choose to go independent in cheer, all you're doing is making yourself unavailable for postseason, because you can already compete in any competition that you want as your team. Independent, following all the exact same regulations,
Gotcha.
all the
Gotcha.
the rostering, the academic eligibility, transfers, all that. So I would say that option doesn't really make a lot of sense when you're
Yeah.
not forced to play anybody. You can already do whatever competitions you want as long as you stay within the limit.
That makes sense.
That's a
And
good question.
so we talked about sanctioning it in the fall and the winter, but then there was some Title IX problems. Is there such a thing as sanctioning something for the summer?
Yeah.
There is no summer season, so you
No.
could do that.
No. And so, yeah, and I think and Rollins brought this up, the opening a can of worms, if you're going to sanction it as a full sport and then also go outside of the rules of sanctioned sports, we are going to get parents, community members, legislators, everybody on us for, okay, then football should be 2 seasons, basketball should be 2 seasons, baseball should be 2 seasons. All of those, that conversation will just grow. And I think that's a fine line that we need to be very careful about going if we want to call it a full sanctioned sport and follow all our rules, but then give it different rules. So that's my biggest concern with that. Grandy. If you're talking, you're still muted. I can't see you anymore, so I don't know.
Oh, sorry. I
There you go.
thought I hit the
Okay.
button. We're having a lot of conversation about sport versus activity. Right now, our direction for the board is to come back with the regulations if they were to make it a sport. I think if we focus on that, go through these regulations that are drafted, send to the board our recommendations, and if part of that recommendation is, hey, we might want to consider just leaving it an activity, but again, for us to be talking back and forth, because we're not going to send it back to the board saying, no, we're not sanctioning a sport. That's the board's decision.
Yep.
With that, on this deleting the 552, I totally support that. As the district who's been in the OCR complaint for the last 14 years, it makes no sense adding a sport that cannot help us with that OCR complaint. It just doesn't make sense in that. Again, so I think we focus on going through making the rules as if it were a sport, and let the board then say we like these rules or we don't, and go from there.
Couldn't agree more. Anybody else before I move off of this one? So just to
Thank you.
just to reiterate, this regulation, subsection 1, is talking about who they're going to report to. Obviously, if they're a sanctioned sport, they're going to report to the athletic office. That doesn't need to be in there anymore. The next one's about the season, where it's talking about it's basically following into fall and winter. That would not apply anymore. If it's a full sanctioned sport, it's got to be one season, which we picked winter. And then the next part's about tryouts and when those can be. That's obviously going to then just fall into winter. So all of this is pretty much, unnecessary at this point if it's going to fall under all of our other regulations for sports. Any other questions on this one before we move on? Okay. 554. This is going over the number of participants and teams. We already have a regulation that talks about, the difference between varsity, JV, and freshman, and who can be on which levels. So I think that's unnecessary and in having its own regulation, because we have one that talks about that for all of our sanctioned sports. Subsection 2 is really relating to indoor. So this is your sideline. This regulation to me was interesting that we even had this in reg, because we don't recognize sideline as a sport, and most of our regulations are really talking about the competitive side. So it was interesting that this was here. To me, it fit more in a basketball safety regulation to make sure that there's no concerns with the size of a Spirit team around a basketball game. So we did remove this, but you'll see it later on in the non-competitive guidelines, because I still think it's important that your non-competitive teams that are supporting your indoor athletics are limited to a certain number for safety reasons, for the play of the actual athletic contest that they're supporting. So that's what this was about, that subsection 2. Three is talking about, some other specifics on the school being able to kind of limit the maximum numbers for like a halftime. Again, basically all of this regulation I pulled from the NIAA because it's really related to the sideline piece and put that information in the non-competitive guidelines. So I didn't get rid of it. I just moved it into a policy outside of reg since it's not related to competitive. There's not going to be a set maximum number on the competitive team. Each individual competition may have limits, but that's going to be by that producer. They may say, your size of your varsity squad is limited to this because that's the only space that we have based on the mat size and things like that. But that doesn't need to be in NIAA. That would be competition by competition. Any questions on that one? Okay. 556 just talks about you can have a separate tryout for fall and winter. Again, this is more related to the sideline piece, saying that you can have your sideline and then you can have a winter sideline and or a winter competitive tryout. That would be removed. The tryouts in that is for sideline is really, again, going to be dictated by the school and school district, but we did put some suggested guidelines in that non-competitive guidance policy. So just remove that from here. Okay, any questions on that one before we move on? I think that one's pretty self-explanatory. Okay, 558 is talking about the members of the squad and their ability to participate in a sanctioned sport. So this is where it's saying that you can, within a season, participate in your sanctioned sport while also being a part of the spirit squad. And so that was our previous rule because we didn't sanction sport, so they could do sideline and competitive at the same time as their sport, as long as everybody kind of agreed to everything. And the principal approves it, which ends up happening. So we're removing that as that's obviously something that would not be required if it's sanctioned. And I know, like Danny's public comments stated, this is a concern for our small schools. I reiterated that in our survey and in my presentation that we could be losing, full sanctioning could be losing programs, and we actually could be decreasing numbers here and there for those smaller schools. And some of, not even just all of our smaller schools being impacted by this, but also some of our larger schools that just don't have big numbers, and some, like their girls basketball program does not have a lot of numbers. And some of those girls are, changing after their game and putting on their cheer uniform to cheer for the boys. They can still do that, but they may also then be cheering in competitions on Saturdays with their cheer team while they're playing on the basketball team. And so it could affect a lot of different schools. And I put those numbers in the presentation to kind of show the board, like, hey, I think if even one is affected, that like that's something to consider, at least to be thinking about, is this benefiting us or is it hurting us by doing that? So we would need to remove that if we want to be fair and equitable across the board with all of our sanctioned sports, because we do not currently allow anybody to participate in more than one sanctioned sport at the same time. That being said, they still could do sideline. So there's sideline non-competitive cheerleading. They could still cheer in the winter season while playing a winter sport. They just could not be a part of the competitive team. Any questions on that? 558.
No, Kate, at the 1E meeting up in Reno.
Yeah.
I don't think there was one school that had a competitive cheer. Everybody had a traditional old school sideline cheer squad, and many of them, if not all, had girls that would cheer, play basketball, turn around, put their cheer uniform on, and cheer for the boys.
Yep.
So
yeah, I'm hearing mostly 1A is not affected. It's more of our 2A and some 3A, and then some of our not smaller 4A, but smaller 4A programs that struggle to get kids to come out. But yes, I would say when I'm saying small schools, actually 1A is not really included because I don't think most have a competitive team. Thank you for that. Anything else on this? Okay. 560, this talks about certain competitions, event prohibited from things that they can't participate in. Basically, we already have regulations about what teams can compete in when you're sanctioned. It has to be against, members of their state association, has to be sanctioned by the NIAA or sanctioned by the NFHS. We have a whole new regulation about how to, properly sanction events. So anything that was related to sanctioning events and or participating in particular events, we took out that language as it would be repetitive, since we have regulations that cover all of our sports. We don't have this individually for any other sport. So we didn't feel it was necessary to keep that. The only reason it was like that is because it wasn't a sanctioned sport. So we did need some specifications for Spirit to make sure that they were following some standards with the competitions that they were going to. So at this point, these are no longer required based on our other more encompassing regulations that we have. Any questions on 560? Okay, and 562 has to do with part of the sanctioning process and making sure that when you're sanctioning an event, that it follows Spirit rules of the school, law of the regulations of the state. Again, this is all encompassing in our other regulations and would be part of, the application process for sanctioning an event. So it's not necessary in NIAA anymore since we have it elsewhere. And then same with 564, this talks about the actual application and what's required. Again, don't feel it's necessary to have this specified in NIAA any longer, as we have specific rules for sanctioning events for other sports. Any questions on either of those? They're kind of related. And then this is the penalty for attending a contest that's not sanctioned or not sanctioning your event prior to having your event. Again, all of this falls within our regular regulations regarding sanctioning of events and tournaments and would fall within all of that. Any questions on those last few? Okay. In blue here, these would be brand new regulations that we would add in, and these really follow a lot of the language that you'll see in all the other sanctioned sport sections, where we're talking about the season. So each sport basically has a season that they fall within. It's dictated through 390, our regulation, which you'll see later on, that shows you the sanctioned sports for each season. And that is always determined by the board. And that is the case for all of our sports. So this is where we're removing that language about when the season can be, where it can be in 2 different seasons. For Spirit, now we're saying, nope, it's going to be in the season that's determined by the board based on the calendar that's created. So that language matches very similarly to other sports sections. And same with subsection 2, this language is in all of those regulations, which basically says, except as otherwise in 371, you have to basically conclude your season with the state tournament. That 371 allows for a school to petition to the executive director to have an out of season competition. And I'll talk about that a little bit more, because this is actually one of the biggest questions that people are having about nationals. Some of those contests are in later after the season's over, like in March, and they were wondering if they could still compete in that since the season would be over. And Tim and I had this conversation, and he agreed, absolutely, if there's a national contest that you get a bid for that is outside of the season, that would be something that he would approve, as he's done for other sanctioned sports. The question then came up, well, how many can we do? Can we do 4 out of season contests? And the answer to that would be no, based on the way 371 is written. If you do pull up that regulation, it says they can petition for a contest out of the season, and the competition, everything is singular in that regulation. And I don't believe in the history of the NIAA that we've approved multiple for a school to attend outside of the season. I think that's really just meant as a one-off for a particular thing like a nationals or something of that nature. The only concern I do have with 371 is it does actually indicate in that regulation that it can't be a national contest. So that may be language that we look at kind of separately from this. It's not specified about Spirit, but we may need to put language in there if we do want to allow nationals for Spirit, since it does have the word nationals in it when they compete in that. I think it's different than an actual national championship because there are many different national competitions. I think it's just more of a name for the contest to say that anybody across the nation can be a part of it, if that makes sense. Is my understanding. It's not just one contest that's the national championship for the entire country. So we might be able to just be okay with the way the language is there, knowing that that's not exactly what that term means in the sense of Spirit. So just wanted to bring that up. Any questions on this regulation? Okay. The next one is the manual. So again, this is general language that we have for most of our regulations for each sport. After the schools are aligned, they may not even need to be aligned depending on how many are actually having a competitive team. But when they are aligned, the board prepares a manual the board will approve a manual that is created by the association for the postseason and what that looks like. And the championship team for each class will be determined based on any alignment that happens. So if we do end up aligning into multiple classifications, there'll be championships for each classification that we do end up having. So those numbers will all be determined when we get final numbers of who's going to be competing. And that's all determined by alignment. Any questions on that? All right, and the last one that would be added is just some general requirements. We talked at the committee meeting about ensuring that we had something specific for the actual event for regionals and state. And much of this language is similar to most of our other regulations, again, for each sport, where it has to follow any rules that the board determines and the NFHS determines. And that we would put together the tournament that lists each of the events, just like for instance, track, where this is the order of the events, because it runs similar to that, where we have lots of different entities under cheer and dance. We would have something put together of this is how the event would run. So we want to make sure we included that like we have for a couple other sports where that matters. And we also, in subsection 2, wanted to be sure that individual students can compete in more than 4 events. Honestly, this is very similar in a sense to track, where you can only, you have your limit of the number of events that a student can participate in. The committee felt 4 was more than enough. It's very unlikely that a single student would compete in 4 events within a single spirit committee, but that at least gives that maximum number, just in case you do have a student that maybe does 2 under dance and 2 under cheer, or something like that, where it could happen. We want to just make sure that that was specified, so you didn't have a kid that was doing tons of different events under different categories. And then just complying with NFHS rules for each team. So that's standard language that we have for most of our sports. Any questions on that?
Well, I do have a question on 2 then. I mean, if this were to be sanctioned, then dance would be sanctioned as well, so they couldn't be in dance and cheer at the same time, correct?
So they could, because spirit is the sport. So just like in track and field, you can be a part of, the track event and field events. We're viewing spirit as one sport, and then the events under that there's cheer events and there's dance events.
Okay.
It would all be technically one roster, and then the team and coaches could decide who is doing what, who is doing this type of cheer event, who is doing this type of dance event, but the sport itself would be spirit.
Okay.
Good question, though. Anything else? All right. That's mostly the tough stuff. I'll say the rest of this, if you read through, these are all regulations that we just looked at to add lacrosse to. It is just the adding of the term spirit. So 208 is just our membership regulation, where we have the minimum number to qualify as your single sport. Like if you're a school that all we have is spirit in the winter, if you are going to count that as your winter sport for your membership purposes, you have to have 10 pupils, whether that's a co-ed team or girls team. So it doesn't matter which it is. If it's a co-ed team, that would count as actually both your boys and your girls numbers for that season. So, and even if it was just one boy, and we decided that was fair because a co-ed team is if there's at least one boy on it. So, this could affect some smaller privates and charters that need that for their membership. It's not a requirement, it's just a requirement for those that get membership through the association, not automatically because they're a public school in the state. So that's what that is, just adding that number there. And the committee felt 10 was fair as a minimum number that really you need for a competitive team. 10 is really the minimum that makes sense there. Any questions on that one? All right, 378, this is our maximum number of contests. So under winter, because it would fall as a winter sport, we have increased that from 2 to 6. So this was something we heard loud and clear cheer coaches wanted more. So the committee came back, we talked more. They said, 6 seems like more than enough. Most are not competing in more than 6 regular season competitions. Again, this is in or out of state. It doesn't have to be, there's no one-on-one competitions. This is all just whatever you choose to do. They're the big competitions we have on the weekends here in the state or anything out of the state, 6 during the season. Then you also, if you qualify for regionals and or state, that would add 7 and 8 for your regular season. So 8 total, including state, if you go all the way. And then, as I've mentioned, the out of season competition, if you do qualify or have an out of season competition that ends just after the state championship, you could petition for that to be approved. So technically up to 9 total with that additional out of season. We felt this was fair. We got good feedback from current cheer coaches that was a decent compromise on the number, and we had no issue in upping that number if that's what people wanted. So that's where we went with that. Any questions on that?
Kate, are these events are these events 2-day events? Are they 1-day event? I'm looking at a cost, say, to the school district if I'm sending some teams to California so these squad competitions would be, those 6 would be equivalent to a league schedule.
Yeah, there's not going to be a league schedule. So this is they get to choose what they do. We offer several in our state every year, and that number probably would even go up. But like, for instance, I'm pulling up just to see how many. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There are 9 NIAA sanctioned in the state of Nevada contests that were on the schedule for this year. And they're all 1 day on our schedule. I can't speak for other states, but I'd assume they're also probably 1-day events. But obviously, travel wise, it'd probably be for the travel there, more than 1-day thing, having to probably come the day before or whatever.
Sure. Okay.
But the event themselves, I think, and again, I'm not the expert here, are traditionally a 1-day event.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions on that? Okay, perfect. 390, this is our designation of official sanctioned sports. So this is just where we have those sports listed. So it's offered for girls and boys. So as you can see, it's listed under both because you can have a co-ed team. You can also just have a girls team. So, but you can't just have a boys team. So I guess, I don't know if that makes sense. I think still, because it's offered to boys if it's a co-ed team, which I don't know that there's ever just like a boys team, but I guess there possibly could be. Any questions on that? Okay. 632 is just our awards. So we just added in the winter season that Spirit would to each member of the championship team, which is standard for all of our team sports. This is not considered an individual sport, and that any single individual student doesn't get an award. The team for each events can get awards, but the actual team would get the award, not the member. So that was a conversation we had about, first 4 places, like it reads in track, like that's an individual sport. First 4 places for wrestling, that's an individual sport. So that language doesn't fit with Spirit because no individual student is getting award. It's all team based. Any questions on that one? Okay, 798, this is our regulation for the requirements for coaches. So they would now need to follow our full slate of requirements. Currently, what we do in our state is we require them to be CPR certified, concussion certified, or taking the concussion course every 3 years as our sports. And they have to do the cheer and dance safety certification. We do not currently require first aid or fundamentals of coaching. So that would change. They would need to do those 2 additional courses. And the only addition here would be that for Spirit coaches alone, obviously not every coach needs to do this, we would add the cheer and dance safety certification. So to hop back to the public comment from Deb, she mentioned something about another like coaching class. We had a conversation about that. She thought that we might have other coaching requirements courses specific to the sport for each of our sports, which we don't. This is all we have as required. So but that would be something that we would like put on our website as an additional course that's offered if coaches would like to do it, or schools can always offer or require other requirements for their coaches. So you can have, if your school or school district would like them to also do the coaching cheer and dance course, you can require that. We just would not put that in NAC because we don't require that for any other state to have anything outside of, what's here. I don't think this is like a Title IX concern because this is a very specific safety certification that is required and supported by the NFHS. So I don't think requiring cheer to do something additional in this sense for their coaches is outside of Title IX, but would be something, I can always look into. But as of now, I think this is important to keep. We currently do it. Safety is definitely a big concern here. So we added that there. Any questions on that? Okay. And then this is the last one. This is our officials registration. Just talks about the deadline for officials registering, which is a whole other piece of this that we've talked extensively about at the committee, getting our judges either their own association that's approved by the NIAA and or joining one of our already existing associations as an offset or offshoot of that. And obviously we're going to have to figure out how to ensure that everybody that's judging in the state of Nevada has some very specific score sheet and scoring rubric that is used. That's something also related to Title IX that is kind of a heartburn that I think the Title IX people have when they talk about Spirit is it's a little bit subjective as far as, who wins and who loses and how that's all, calculated. If you think of any other sport, it's all based on times, points and all of those things. So this is a little bit different. How are the points being determined here? And it needs to be as consistent as possible across the state to qualify under Title IX. So that's kind of a separate conversation here. It's just we're putting it in with the winter sports. Also, we had noticed flag football had never been added way back when. So I added that language because I realized that wasn't in there. But Spirit is really the addition here that we're talking about. So any questions on that? Okay, those are all the regulations. Now, obviously we talked, I'm just going to go up to the top here. Obviously, we talked about some of the concerns we have in general with the sanctioning of Spirit. I have a lot of other comments that I could bring in. I think to Grandy's point, the point of this meeting is what we've been directed to do, which is bring all of the regulations to the board for sanctioning a sport. If this was any other sport outside of Spirit, this is exactly what we would have done. And so I think to be consistent, that's what we do. This is what we did for lacrosse. And it's consistent with that. I went through everything we did with lacrosse to be sure I was being consistent with that. And I think that we meet the requirements of being a sanctioned sport in Nevada that follows everything if we keep things as is. Is that what is best for our state? I don't 100% know if that's a yes or not. I think we've heard a lot of public comment, and I've talked to a lot of people, and I know our Spirit committee people talk to a lot of people that have concerns. So I don't want to say, this is perfect, but this is what we were tasked with doing and what would align with the sports we have in our state. I think the determination will then have to happen at the board meeting. And I can share a lot of other things that I've heard in Q&A, that I've had with people that are more related to the actual sanctioning piece of this versus these regulations. So are there any questions, comments, additional things to add? Sai, you have your hand. Anybody else? After Sai goes, just put your hand up and I will jump to you. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Sai.
just a clarification. So what we're doing is saying the following regulations would coincide with the NAT code to sufficiently sanction cheer.
Correct.
So we're not saying as it is written, we're not commenting on whether or not what is written is the correct way to sanction cheer. I'm just trying to figure out how.
Yeah, and I think you guys can, any of you can come, please do to come public comment to discuss more of our conversation here and what you're hearing. But I think that will be part of my presentation of these regulations is to say, listen, we went over this and this is how to sanction a sport properly in our state, aligning with all of our other sports. It is not decided from this committee whether or not this is what is best for Spirit. But if it is to be considered a sanctioned sport in the state, this is the prescribed way it needs to be done to qualify, to even come close to qualifying for Title IX.
Okay, that makes sense.
Fair? Okay. Yeah, like we're not going to be supporting this, you know, the committee supports this and says this is the right way, this is the way it should be done, this is just how it is meant to be done based on reg. Any other questions, comments? Okay, there is one more piece to this, so I just wanted to kind of get everything done with the regulations. I'm gonna scroll back down now through all of these to page 21. In our committee meeting, we had a lot of discussion. We were kind of meshing the two together again with competitive, non-competitive, and feeling, oh, we need to have a reg that says this or that for the non-competitive part to make sure everybody understands. And Tim and I both kind of agreed and talked in that meeting to say, I think it would be very confusing to have regulations about something we don't sanction. I think that is why they've been meshed in the past, is that Sideline did kind of use the NIAA regulations to dictate how Sideline happened, even though we weren't, you know, it was just in it was in this weird middle area. So we feel with sanctioning, it is very important that our regulations are solely related to the competitive side of spirit, and that we don't have a problem with putting together some form of a policy for a few of the things we feel are still important for schools and school districts to consider for their Sideline non-competitive team for safety purposes mostly. And then we also put some guidelines in there that match what we've historically done in our state, you know, based on the NAC that we did have, where a lot of schools were just using that NAC for their Sideline team. So hopefully you had a chance to read through it. Essentially, we go over the purpose of this, and to be very specific, that this is your non-competitive teams that are there for school spirit, sportsmanship, and just there to support your school programs. They're the education-based side, the activities. They are not the competitive team. So we wanted to make that very clear that this is solely for those. And then when it came to some of the rule adoptions and coach responsibilities, this is still required for your Sideline coach. So say you have a lot of times you're gonna have the same Sideline coach as your competitive coach, but there may be schools that have different, right? There may be a completely separate coach for the competitive side. That could happen. So if that is the case, then your Sideline only coach would have the same requirements as they've always had for spirit in our state, which is those three: the safety course, the concussion course every 3 years, and the CPR. So nothing changes for those that may only coach the Sideline, or for those that just don't have a competitive team at all. You just are going to follow the old rules when it comes to the coach's responsibility. So if you are not a competitive team doing any competition, just Sideline, same coach responsibilities. And then I added a lot of language that you will see from the things that we deleted, the regs we deleted, like your school can determine the eligibility of those students. And if you want to do anything extra for your coaches, you can always go above and beyond that. So just kind of reiterating some of that existing language that we had. And then when it came to the number and classification, this was pulled directly from the NAC that we removed. You know, we suggest or recommend, again, we're not going to dictate here. We're just going to recommend in this case that you have a varsity JV and a freshman, no more than that. And then you may have additional non-competitive performance groups that fall under spirit. So you could have drill, you could have all of these things that are, again, just school-based. So it's not like for spirit in general, you can only have one of each. You could have a cheer team, you could have a dance team, you can have a drill team, you could have all of these different entities that fall under the term spirit. But we recommend just one of each of those teams per entity that you have at your school. Again, these are non-competitive performance groups on your campus. This was something that was in the reg I felt important to keep. Sometimes, you know, at assemblies or something, you might pull a kid like from the stands to be a part of some form of an activity that by our regulation was always not allowed. There shouldn't be just a random kid that's engaging in any of the activities of your Sideline or your school-based, you know, cheer and dance teams that is allowed to do something with the team at a particular event. That's a safety concern. You don't want that kid just jumping in and being thrown in the air or something like that. So it was important to keep that more as just a safety thing. It was part of our reg prior. Limits. So this is again pulled right from the old NAC regarding the indoor competitions, 2016 and 14 for the different squads. And then this language as well was pulled from the NAC about the school having the ability to limit the maximum number if they feel they don't have enough space. And they can determine at halftime how many each team, but everything should be equal between the two teams. So again, not new language, just language pulled from the NIAA that's more related to the sideline aspect. Tryouts, again, pulled from the NIAA, but this is just suggestions because we are not going to dictate how this looks. A school or school district can determine based on their district policy how they do tryouts for sidelines, school-based, academic-based dance programs that only are school-based, not competitive. We just pulled all the language from the reg that we previously had to kind of say this is our suggestion, since that's what historically we've done in our state, but schools can go in any other way that they want with this, and we're going to let the school districts make their policy. So they can say our policy is to follow the NIAA policy and just leave it at that, and then reference ours, or you can make your own. Any questions on that piece? And then the last piece is governance. Again, this is pulled from our NIAA, where your non-competitive team can report to some administrator. We used to say they could be an activities administrator or an athletic administrator. We don't care. We're not going to govern that. We're just going to recommend that the principal assign the coaches for your non-competitive spirit team to report to an administrator. One of the good questions that came up is, should we then go back to separating spirit and who oversees that? In our bigger schools where they have an administrator that's over activities and an administrator that's over athletics, I think that's a good idea that the non-competitive fall and winter spirit teams, even if it's the same coach, kind of report issues, concerns, and their activities to that administrator over activities. And then the competitive team is governed by the athletic side of the house. That's obviously not a concern for some of our smaller schools that have one person that's doing all the things and discipline and everything else at the school. So, but if you have a school where you can separate it, that's a good recommendation, just to really keep those things separate. So we did put that in here. And then just this last piece, and just whoever is over this team, just ensuring compliance with this policy, where it says that it's required. There's a few things like the coaches requirements that are required. And then there's recommendations. NFHS Spirit Rulebook, so they still need to follow that. And then any of your school or school district policy and any applicable state laws. So this is just something that the committee really wanted to still have some support there, some of the safety concerns required, and then some recommendations for brand new programs or just schools where they might need a little guidance on how to create a district policy, that this was important to have. Any questions? That was kind of a lot. I think this went to kind of answer your question, Rollins, earlier about having a definition for the non-competitive side. I hope this policy, this would be something just on our website, doesn't have to go through the legislative process, would kind of help solidify the separation between the two.
Good. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. If there are no further questions on anything related to spirit, I would be looking for a motion to approve, and I would just say all of the regulations, because we've had kind of extensive conversation about all of them. I think it would be easiest just to approve as a whole group. And then if there's any conversation from there, we can bring that back up, but be looking for a motion to approve all of these spirit regulations under item 6 on our agenda.
Really quick clarification.
Yeah, go ahead.
What does it mean if we say no to approving them?
If we say no to approving them and the board moves forward as is with the full sanctioning, we would have no regulations to present to the board and would put us behind the 8 ball. So if there's particular issues that we want to address, I think we have to hash it out here so we have something to present to the board at the April meeting. Because if we don't, and we're going full sanction starting the winter of 26-27, we have to have regulations in place.
So that was kind of my question, was us saying that this is what we're sending forward doesn't mean this is concrete, because the board still has to vote on it, correct?
Correct. And like I said earlier, like my presentation of these regulations will be that the board had extensive conversation about them, and we are not in a consensus that this is what we feel is best for the sport of spirit. However, these are the regulations that would need to align to be a sanctioned sport with all of our other sanctioned sports.
There is no other way to sanction cheer except for these things. This is the only way you would ever be able to sanction cheer.
No, I don't think so. I think that there is a possibility to sanction it in other ways. I just don't necessarily think that that is in the best interest of the state for the many reasons I brought up, like it not matching our other sports. It doesn't have Title IX ability. So what is really the purpose, I guess, if we're going to sanction it, why sanction it if it's not going to fit the mold of our sanctioning, if that makes sense? Because if not, then we don't sanction and we have other options of operating.
Right. So I guess my point would be, it doesn't behoove us to approve these regulations because we don't agree with how, or some
Right.
of us don't agree with how they're outlined. And so
Yeah.
it would have forced the board's hand of saying, well, we can't sanction a sport without regulations, or no.
Yeah, I mean, the board can definitely, when we send these forth, they could number one say, well, we don't agree with this, and they could amend them, right? They could say, as a board, they could say, well, we're going to sanction this, and we're going to sanction it for fall and winter, and we're also going to change this that they can try out. We're going to keep that reg. They can try out in the spring. They could change all of the regulations that we push forth. This committee could also do that. If you want, I would just have some caution with it. Is all I have to say. I just don't. I would be remiss if I did not mention that could cause a lot of other issues with all of our other sports. But if that is the way that the committee wants to go, that's the way we can go, and we can present that to the board. They also can make that choice on their own. So it's really up to you guys, what you want. And we're going to take majority of what this group feels, and we'll send that forth. So we can have more conversation before we even move forward with a motion.
I'm ready to make a motion. And then if we want to wait and do the second, and then I just think at this point, we've done what they've asked us to do. And it's at this point, we let the board decide.
What's your motion?
So my motion would be that we would send all of these regulations that we've talked about to the board to let them vote for sanctioning of chair.
Okay, we have.
And so I'm sorry, Spirit, sanctioning of Spirit, not of chair.
Of Spirit, got it. Thank you. Looking for a second.
Jonathan
I'll
Grandy
second.
clicked on.
I got you, Randy.
Mhm.
Thank you. Okay, opening it back up for a discussion from here.
I want to make sure, Kate, that we stress to the board that these qualifications and rules and regulations comply 100% with all of our current sanctioned sports. They don't deviate from them at all.
Yep.
And that, that was the consensus, I believe, of this committee is that we attempt to try to follow all of the rules of all of the current sanctioned sports offered by the NIAA.
Yes, I will definitely make that clear that both, the committee, not only did the Spirit Committee not have a full consensus as this is what's best, this committee also obviously does not have a full consensus as this is what's best for the sport, but this is what we're presenting is based on what we currently have in our state as a sanctioned sport. If it wants to be fully sanctioned, we want to move forward, then yes, we have complied with that, and I will make that clear.
I think that should be the motion. Yeah, I don't know if that makes sense. Like the motion should be that as these regulations stand right now, they're fully compliant with the NIAA and its existing NAT code.
Would you like to amend it all?
Kate,
I mean,
hold on a minute. Kate, hold on a second.
Yeah.
I think that's what the motion is saying,
It-
Si.
yeah, that is what it is.
motion is the motion to approve the recommendation of the regulation revisions. That's it. That's all it is. You're approving. These would be the regulations. We're not approving whether we agree with them. We're not.
Right. Okay.
We're not. It's just a simple.
Yes.
John, if I'm misspoken, you can rescind your second, and then we can go forward.
Agreed.
That's exactly how I meant it for mine is to not agree or disagree. We're just saying if you're going to be a sport, this is what you have to follow.
Copy.
and I will make that very clear as well, Si. Anybody else?
To be a little bit transparent with this, with the cheer organizations and those groups out there, we can't give them any information based on what we've just done. I have a strong feeling that based on the requirements to be sanctioned, which I don't think the cheer group truly understood what that would look like, that I would think that the majority of them would say, shoot, let's just keep things the way they are and do what we do instead of having a regulations that prevent us from doing what we've been doing.
Yeah, and
You
I
understand?
don't want to
That
speak
makes
for
sense?
anybody. I don't want to speak for anybody, but I've
Yes.
heard that feedback in just the struggle in this working the way that it needs to work to fit in this mold. So yeah, I don't disagree that I think many feel that way.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll find out.
Anybody else? Any comments? Questions? Okay, we have a first, we have a second. Do we want to do a roll call here maybe? All right, maybe we'll just I'll call for it. And if I hear nays, I'll see who they were. How about that? So if you are in favor of this motion, please say aye. Go ahead and
Aye.
any opposed? Okay. And again, I will be extremely clear with the reasoning behind this approval and why we're moving forward in this direction.
And we can add public comment.
Absolutely. You can, yeah. Anybody that's obviously there's some people that are on the board or liaisons to the board that can speak, while they're at the meeting, but anybody else in this committee, I would actually encourage you to provide public comment either live. It will be in Las Vegas at El Dorado High School in April, or you can submit something. But please do, because I think it's important for any board member that doesn't listen to this meeting to know kind of how we got to the decisions of where we're at and why we're moving this direction.
And I promise I will make sure that everyone knows what we talked about. I'll try.
And speaking of that, I know Tammy, we had a discussion about an item that was discussed there. Did you want to bring that up now that we're kind of through the cheer part of that, just to bring that regulation back up at all as a discussion piece?
Yes, I can't remember what the regulation was.
Mm-hmm. It is 378, and I can go back up to it just to bring it up there.
378. Thank you.
I didn't know if you
I
forgot.
thought I wrote it down, but apparently I didn't. I haven't had my notes, but I didn't have the regulation itself written down.
Yeah, you're good. And because this regulation is up for edits, we can actually make a motion on it if anybody in the group feels necessary based on this discussion. But I want to just open the floor to Tammy because she did have something else to bring up about 378.
Yes, so it's actually not sure if we need to even make I don't know if it actually needs to be amended. I think it's just a clarifying on record when it comes to the number of games, specifically for football. So I was trying to see on here. I'm trying to look, but my eyes are not the greatest.
You're good. It's 1A2. I kind of try to highlight it. It's hard. There we go.
Yes. Okay. So right now it says 9 football games. Now, nobody's asking to switch the 9. It doesn't have to specifically, or you tell me, does it specifically have to state if there were, because I know there's not normally football tournaments per se, but like 7 games and then a 2-game tournament. Like if football were to go that direction, does it specifically have to say that? Is what I want to get clarification on.
And I might call in Neil here. This may be the first time our new legal counsel to say anything about legal issues, but in my reading of a regulation, it's the way it's written. So when I'm reading this regulation, there are certain sports that it lists the number of matches, contests, meets, whatever it may say. And then there are certain ones that list the number of competitions plus any allotment for tournaments. So in my interpretation of this, if a law is written in a particular way where it is addressing something like tournaments, that if it omits the word tournament, that a tournament is not allowed in that particular sport. That is the way that I read this regulation, that it appears to be written. Neil, do you have anything, Mr. Lombardo, to add to this? I hate to put you on the spot, but I would love, if you're still here, I'm just double checking, guys, if you have anything that you feel legality-wise, if I'm correct in my assessment.
You are correct in your assessment. Unfortunately, I'm at a little bit of a loss because when I read this on its face, you are correct. I'm going to take a look at the 2 exceptions quickly while the meeting continues, because I see that there's an exception in subsection 2, which honestly I don't know about. Where am I looking right here?
That is that. I just pulled that up for you, just so you know what that says too, just if that makes a difference. I'll read it real quick too.
Because I mean, the reason why I'm asking
Yeah.
specifically is there are sports on here that don't say tournaments, but they actually do participate in tournaments, is why I'm asking. Like girls golf, boys golf, they participate in tournaments, but that's not put on here per se.
Okay.
I wanted to make sure that football's not any different.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point because let's see.
Because some of these do participate in tournaments, even though it's not listed here.
Yeah, like when we're talking 12 swim meets, like some and like with track too, like there's some meets that are invitational meets, but I think they still qualify as that's more of like a technicality, I would say, of like, it's still a meet. The boys and girls golf, that could be something different. Yeah, I mean, I guess.
Like, for example, the boys just last weekend had the Pahrump Valley Invitational. That's not listed on here, but it's considered a tournament.
So when they're competing in those tournaments though, it's still an individual match in the sense of they're doing 18 holes.
And
They're not
also,
like,
and Kate, don't forget, those are also listed as contacts as well.
right, but yeah, like matches. So it's like that's
Right.
even though it might be called a tournament, it's still a singular match.
Contact.
Right. And
So
that's
yeah,
how
and I
I
would,
interpreted it. I just wanted to make sure that it wasn't any different for football.
yeah. So I would say, in that sense, like it's 9 games. So
Regardless of what it's called.
yeah, and they have to follow, it has to be 5 days, days before a game. So I think the calling of something a tournament, that it's not specified there because it's not really something that's
It's not
traditionally
common for
used.
this
Yeah, across the country, there's not really football tournaments outside of your state tournaments. So I think that's more like it's just not really a thing. And I would say those matches, they're still operating as singular matches for those individual teams as a single football game would be, or you know what I mean? Versus the tournament when we're talking basketball, anything that's listed as a tournament is competing in more than one game during that event, right? You're going to a volleyball tournament, you're competing in 4, 5, 6 games within that tournament. So it's allowing you to kind of have a higher game limit. Whereas anything else, like you can't do more than 16 matches for golf. So if that tournament was you're gonna do 18 holes and then this wouldn't happen, turn around, do 18 more 10 minutes later, that would be against this regulation. I think it's just calling that game, that match, a tournament.
I guess that's the clarification. I guess that's the clarification piece is, would football be excluded from having a tournament due to this regulation?
I think the bigger question would be based on the scheduling of that, because
the scheduling of the tournament, right? If there's 5 days in between, or
yeah, and
is a tournament. I can't remember if a tournament can last a certain amount of days. 6
Got to
days.
be done in 6 days.
6 days, yeah.
6 days. Okay.
Yeah, and I think that's the technicality you're hearing right now. What they're looking at is they're looking at it. Well, if we do a game and then we have the 5 sleeps, can we do another game? And can we call it a tournament? Okay, yeah. It doesn't matter how you get to the 9 games. You got to 9 games. Yeah. Now what they're asking is if we have 5 sleeps in between it and we extend the game limit to 12, now we can run what we would consider to be a postseason. The problem also falls into this, Tammy, is we have a window for football which is predetermined. So I'm going to be honest with you, extending the football, where are you going to put the games?
I don't think anybody asked to extend.
Nobody wants to. Nobody's asking
something else.
Yeah.
Nobody's asking to.
No, I'm just saying that. That's just me thinking out loud.
This is just making sure that if it were to be called a tournament, or if it were to, however it's decided, is that this regulation wouldn't prohibit it.
Right.
That's basically the clarification I'm asking.
I think it's just semantics in the sense of like, if
that's
you
what
call 2 games that are separated by 5 days a tournament, I guess I don't see a particular violation of a regulation in the sense of calling it that. As long as they fit within 9 games, 5 sleeps before. I mean,
That's exactly what
outside of it just obviously not having anything to do with postseason, you know, everything playoff, postseason, league, regional, state, all of that is obviously dictated by the board and all that. So if it's a regular season game and they call it something, as long as it's not calling it, you know, some kind of playoff, I don't necessarily see a violation.
It's not a championship. It's not any of that. It's just, okay. Just, that's all I wanted to make sure. Yeah. Not adding any games, just making sure with this, how it's directly written, not adding any more games, any of that.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Randy, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, I was going to say, you know, you're talking about like the golf invitationals and track invitationals. I think the difference there is you're not competing to qualify for the next event, right? At a track invitational, that's the meet. Whereas, you know, I think a tournament, a basketball, baseball, volleyball tournament, you're competing, you know, for that next contest, and your result determines where you fall for the next contest would be kind of where my definition.
What is the purpose of calling those golf contests a tournament? Tammy, do you know? I didn't know they were really called I didn't know there was actual something.
Well, I mean, it depends on how they're ran. So, like in golf, sometimes you can have an 18-hole cut that if you do it on a Thursday and you have to make the cut to make it to a Friday,
the second day.
Part of, that you can still. But I mean, I don't think like, and I understand what Grande is saying for sure. With the invitationals, they're maybe not for how they're going on the next week, but there are, like in a volleyball tournament, you still, how you do in your first 3 games still determines if you continue.
Right. That's the difference between a tournament. I think that's the difference between the term tournament and doing a contest but I see how they may be almost.
Unless it's just a round robin tournament. You don't, not all tournaments have to be.
That's true.
It totally just depends on the sport, depends on how it's. Like I know, like my basketball tournament, you know, the beginning of it's round robin, but then it turns into you have to continue to qualify. But it doesn't have anything to do with the rest of the season. It's just in that specific tournament.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, because the definition, just reading it, tournament means any series of games, contests, or meets, which is scheduled by the association among member schools or by a school for any of its teams or pupils who participate in a sanctioned sport and which does not exceed 6 consecutive days excluding Sunday. So it's just a series of games, a series of contests. So, you know, if they
I'm sorry, did I just catch that? Did you say excluding Sunday?
Excluding Sundays, yeah.
Okay.
Would that not work for football then? Because 5 sleeps, or is the 5 sleeps?
It's 5 sleeps between the games, but if it's excluding Sunday in a tournament, that means you have to have it done. Yeah, that's semantics. Never mind.
Okay. Neil.
Thanks, Kate. And I did review all the subsection exceptions, and I think I agree with you and Tim that it's just semantics. 9 games are 9 games. Doesn't matter if you call it a tournament. Doesn't matter what you call it. That's how I read these NACs. I checked out 385B, 434, subsection 5, and then I also read the subsection 2, which is a listed exception here in 378. And none of them seem to indicate that they basically support everything you're saying. So that would be my opinion.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else in that? I just wanted to make sure we brought it up because I know it was something that you got on your.
Was there ever correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought there was something too about like if you didn't partake in the tournaments, it meant you were allowed more contests.
Yeah, and I think that's the piece is that you're not doing the substituting, right? We do have a regulation that says you can substitute 1 tournament for 3 more games because the purpose of a tournament is technically the series of games, multiple games. So like adding the term tournament to the football would not be we couldn't do that by regulation because then you would be able to sub one of those tournaments for 3 more games, and that obviously can't happen. So I think it's just reading of that regulation. You can do, as long as you fit within the parameters of when games can happen and your game limit, if you want to call it something, you can call it something as long as it doesn't violate other regulations about what you can call things.
Huh.
Make sense? Semantics.
Whatever those are.
Okay, we're gonna move on. All right, item 7 are a bunch of other regulations unrelated to one another that have come up either prior years or, you know, between our last meeting and now that I just wanted to address. The first being a level 2 that we went to where a student, this is on page 24, a student used this regulation to basically indicate that they had eligibility while being out of state and attending a private school in our state. And we did work through this and figure out a way using, because they actually had a hardship as well that qualified the student. But in general, we discussed that there needs to be some specification that our zone of attendance is within the state of Nevada, because apparently that wasn't clear. And now there's obviously the exception of our affiliate schools, which we already know are not in the state of Nevada. That is why they are an affiliate school. They are covered by a separate regulation that allows them to have affiliate membership, which is separate from this. This is for our Nevada schools, public, charter, private. Their zone of attendance is the region within the state of Nevada that is established by their board of trustees or governing board. So that may be, you know, the school board, that could be the individual school. But your zone of attendance, if you are a Nevada school, must be within the state of Nevada. So for our charters and our public charters and our private schools, their attendance zone typically is the entire state of Nevada. That was just kind of a given, we thought, but apparently based on the way our regulation was written, because it didn't actually say that a school could technically say, no, our you know, zone of attendance is the entire country. And that would cause issues with other eligibility regulations. And so we want to make sure that that's clear and that schools understand, you know, your zone of attendance is the state of Nevada. It has to be within the state. Any questions on that or the need to change?
So is this regulation specifically written for privates and charters, or is it written for every school?
It's written for every school, right? Because I mean, your normal public schools are not going to have, if they're a Nevada school, they're not going to have in a zone of attendance outside of the state. Just based on, I don't know, my understanding of a public school in a state. So yeah, it's mostly for private and charter, just to ensure that they also understand that, you know, their regions need to be within the state, because we are the Nevada Interscholastics, you know, Athletic or Activity Association.
My question is, so we're dealing with this and then are we sending this to the board?
Yeah, this would actually go to a workshop. This is a brand new regulation we're bringing forth.
Okay.
So it would be a workshop at the board meeting, along with those other regulations from Spirit. It would all be one big workshop.
Well, my recommendation then, or my question, I guess, not a recommendation. So every other school inside of Nevada, public-wise, has a zone of attendance as well, marked by different.
Determined by their their school board.
Okay, so then if I'm, this regulation would not, it's within the state of Nevada, but it's not the entire state of Nevada.
No, it's just saying, yeah, that your board of trustees, so like for a private school, I guess your private school could say, we're establishing that our region for our zone of attendance is just Southern Nevada. It's just Clark County or something, you know what I mean? So a private school could do that if they chose to. Obviously, most kids are somewhat relatively close to where they're living, but this is just saying that your region that's determined by your board of trustees or your, you know, school board has to also be within the state of Nevada for any type of school, which it already is for public.
And I think that this is brought up a little bit more recently because of the online portion of school now.
Totally.
I think previously to this, like, I don't think anyone ever thought we would be where we are today. But now that a kid can attend technically a school in Kansas from Colorado, I think this is why a lot of people are bringing this up now.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and not to mention, you know, I don't think it's unrealistic for a kid to be in online school and living in the state in which they want to participate for the given season in which they play the sport. Like, I just think that that's a reality, or it's more doable now than it ever has been.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Any other conversation? All right, I would be looking for a motion if anybody would like to to bring us to,
I'll make a motion to take 385B.056 zone of attendance to the Board of Controls for a vote or
thank
for a
you.
workshop, whatever.
That's right. Looking for a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Rollins. Any other questions, comments, discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, that passes, and we'll move that to a workshop. Moving on to 7B on page 25 and 7C, they kind of go together, so I put them together on this page. Tim, if you want to chime in on this and your reason for bringing this one up, it has to do with the process of submitting items for a board agenda, both by member schools and then also any member of the actual board or legislative commission, which is all of our superintendents. And then there's some procedures that you'll see that Tim wrote up for the actual process that the NIAA would use for the submission that go on to page 26.
Thanks, Kate. Yeah, this is basically just clearing it up for everyone. There was some questions earlier in the last summer or early fall as to how items would be put on the agenda, who could bring them and who could put them on the agenda. So this cleans it up. That way we have a process, we have a tracking. It makes it a lot easier for our office to do it because there are a lot of times when sometimes it feels like we're being assigned homework. As opposed to being assigned jobs that the association has hired us to do. So what we want to make sure is there is a process that if a person wants an item on the agenda, there's a clear delineated process of who's going to do the item and how it's going to be submitted to the staff. In other words, this helps clear up the I want this on the agenda, but we want you to go do all the work kind of item, or I want to talk about this on the agenda, and it's on the agenda, and it was like, why is this even on the agenda? Who even suggested this? So this helps clear that up for us. Basically, it takes the regulation, breaks it down, it created a form for them to submit it, and then allows them to provide it to us. We actually have been doing this internally as a staff already. We've been doing it for the better part of almost 2 years now. What we do is we have a working document that we work from, pulls all the items over. That's how we build the packets. If it's not in there, it's not on the agenda. If it's not on the agenda, it's not in the packet. So this helps clean that up. It makes it a little bit more modern, and it also helps clear up with the board itself. You know, like a good example would be Miss Sloan wanting the calendar on this date. Okay, that obviously falls on our staff, but we can go in and we can do it. We don't need to do this. Or Mr. Stallworth says, you know what, Tim, I want to talk about room rates in Winnemucca. And then, all right, Rollins, just submit it in here. We'll make sure it gets on the agenda. Because right now the method is Rollins sends me an email or Pam sends me an email. This helps clear it up. The other thing it does is sometimes we get people who want things on the agenda that are community members, and maybe they don't need to be on our agenda. They need to be on someone else's agenda. And this helps offset that as well. I think that helps clear it up, makes it concise, makes it neat, and we have a tracking of it. You know, I hate kicking things down the road, and we've done that profusely. So that helps also understand where we are as to whether it's a discussion item, an action item, or a combination therein. So any questions, I'll be glad to go over them with you guys.
Thanks, Tim.
Yep.
Any questions? Go ahead.
If something is proposed to you, it has to go on the agenda?
No, it does not. Sometimes it's a phone call, Si. I'll be honest with you. Sometimes somebody will say something like, hey, Tim, let's put this on. No, we've already dealt with that. It was dealt here, here, and here. And I'll be, oh, never mind, pull that off. That helps clear that up as well.
Anybody else? All right, I would be looking for a motion if nobody has anything else, if anyone is willing.
Jonathan Grandy, I'll make a motion to amend NAC 385B 124 and 126 with the revisions as noted.
I'll
Thank
second.
you. Thanks, Tammy. Any other discussion, comments, questions? All right, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, those pass and will be brought to the workshop as well. All right, we're gonna move on to page 27, 7D and E. are going to be lumped together. That's the baseball and softball mercy rules. I am not suggesting we get rid of these. However, we talked about them at the board meeting and realized that baseball and softball are the only two that have the mercy rule in regulation. Again, we've been tasked to kind of look at our regulations and try to minimize and get rid of redundancy or any unnecessary regulations. Because we do not have mercy rules in reg for any other sport, we felt it would be better to just go to this view of what it would look like, which is what we have for every other sport, where it just basically talks about that we've adopted, you know, this particular mercy rule, whatever year that was. In this case, it was 2016, 2017. So this is not new. It was reviewed at the board meeting. There's no issues with it outside of the fact that we felt there was no need for it to continue to be in reg. We would just completely rescind the regulation and just put it in what I would call a policy. That would just be listed under the individual sport. They each have a little tab for mercy rule. If you go look at them, they all look exactly like this. So it's just simply pulling the exact language from the regs right here and just taking the reg number off and just indicating that information. So this should be easy. Any questions, comments? All right, if nobody has anything, I would be looking for a motion to bring both of those forward to the board, 418 and 488.
I'll make a motion to take the revisions for the mercy rules or removal from the mercy rules for 385, 418, and 385, 488 to the board for workshop.
Thank you, Tammy. Looking for a second.
I'll second Rollins Stallworth.
Thank you, Rollins. Any other questions, comments? Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you very much. Let's move on to 7F, which is NEC 385B 444. This is limitation on participation by a pupil. This is within our football section. This was something we brought up and discussed in last year's one of our spring meetings. I can't remember the exact meeting. It was something that we tabled and we did not talk about at our September meeting because we had some other pressing things going on at that time. But I did want to readdress it prior to going into the next football season. This is something that was brought to us by a 2A school regarding the ability for smaller schools that are trying to build their lower level programs, the ability to have students participate in up to 6 quarters of football per week versus the current 1 game, which is 4 quarters. So they could compete in 2 additional quarters of a football game. It has to be within a 7 consecutive day period, so 1 week period, and it could only be during 2 total football games. And so that's kind of the stipulations as how it's written, but the general, you know, kind of idea here is to allow their JV programs to continue to build, to be able to field them in some cases, and have enough students safely to have both your JV and your varsity teams. So, you know, hopefully you had a chance to take a look at that. I do want to scroll down one more page on page 30. We did do a survey at the NIAA conference in February. The 2A was able to meet and talk about this a bit. So I got some anecdotal data from that as well, but I did have the schools complete this survey. And so the only ones I didn't get a survey response from are indicated there. So this is everybody but their response. So it's not a lot of schools. So I just want to make sure, you know, when we're looking at this data, we're really talking about a very small number. The reason this is only being considered for 2A, just so that you understand that 1A does not traditionally have any JV programs. Sometimes JV 2A teams may compete in some ways with 1A if they're, you know, independent and have a way to do so. We had a question on that. So that would kind of be encompassed in this as well for a 2A team if they were playing a 1A team in this sense, if their JV program was, or if their varsity was, which really typically they don't do that. 3A didn't, we don't feel there's a necessity in the 3A for this at all. They pretty confidently and consistency are consistently holding their JV programs. And then the 4A, 5A based on size, again, don't feel there's a necessity for this at those size schools. They should be able to field that. And if not, then they just should not be fielding the level, you know, if they can't field it, but they have certainly the number of students to try to field those programs. So that is why this is only being discussed for the 2A. In the survey, I first surveyed all the schools based on what they currently had. So all the schools that responded had a varsity team in this past school year. And then only four of them were able to field a JV team out of two, what is it, 8 and 5, so 13 teams. So only four of them were able, that we surveyed and that responded, to have a JV team. So the question that they were asked then was, how would allowing 6 quarters of participation during a 7-day time frame affect the maintenance of both your varsity and your JV programs? 4 answered that they would have no net change. They're able to maintain their varsity and JV programs, which is likely the 4 that currently have JV programs. So that, makes sense that they're able to kind of maintain those programs. 3 answered that they would actually be able to field or maintain their JV program, meaning they may have tried to have a JV program, but it fell through, or they've had it in the past and they couldn't, they'd be able to bring it back, or somebody that never had a JV program would now be able to field the JV program because they would be able to split their team to maybe have the 2 teams now. And then 3 answered that they would be able to cancel fewer contests, either JV or varsity, if they have the ability for those students to participate in 6 quarters. So fewer contests being canceled. So I think in all of that, they were positive responses. And then the next question was just based on this proposal of the language, would you be in support of this? 7 of those schools said yes, 2 said no, and 1 was undecided at this time. I did ask for additional comments and feedback, so you can see some of those. This was that one comment about, if their JV team is playing a 1A varsity team, it would still apply to that 2A team, because again, the 1A team wouldn't need it. They only have the 1 individual team. They don't have the JV team. And a lot just showed some support. This was the biggest concern they had at the NIAA meeting, was tracking. They don't want it to be abused. We often hear in our smaller communities that a lot of times our multi-level participation regulation is being abused, where kids can play at the multiple levels for all the other sports besides football. And so their worry is that then this will start to be abused. And so they really, as a class, want to be sure if we do move forward with this, that they just come up with a way to track this. And it would probably be something, internally, I would think with their league, a league tracker. But, of course, the NIAA would be in support of assisting in any of that if they, felt we needed to be involved in it to ensure it was being done properly. But usually those things are tracked at a league level. And there was, this was kind of one of the comments about it really only benefiting the already middle to larger size rosters, and maybe not really benefiting some of the smaller programs that are already not going to be able to field their JV team. Just didn't want to see it as a way of just bolstering those already bigger rosters, and just concerns about safety. So those are just a couple negative cons to this. So that all being said, we didn't get any public comment on this, which I, would have liked to see somebody maybe just chime in, but based on the survey, it seems that there is more of a support for this than not. So I would say that it seems to be something that would benefit them in building their programs, and hopefully more of their programs would be able to field the JV programs and keep those numbers going up. So any questions, comments, open it up for discussion on this.
Is there any existing regulations in which we declare a specific division or a specific class? Like in subsection 3 there, it's saying in class 2A, like, do we have any other regulations that are specific to a certain class or division?
Yeah, we do. When it comes to like scheduling and conducting like state tournaments, we specify certain parameters with 1A, 2A in some cases. Sorry. Oh, I thought somebody was chiming in. Where it's really like about the number of teams in the region in that sense. For something like this, no, it's mostly, I would say, for awards and like qualifying for regionals, qualifying for state, having a state tournament. Just because of the small numbers, we have some specifications in there in case numbers are too small and what kind of happens in those situations. But something specific like this, no, we don't have anything like that. So this would be unique. This would be kind of giving something to a class that no other class has.
Yeah, and the reason I asked that is, like, I wonder if there's not a better way to define it so that it doesn't change in the future. Like, so there's obviously a reason why class 2A schools and below need to have this rule. and it's probably due to school size or program size. So maybe is there a, a number we can put on it? Is there a way that way, down the line, maybe 2A gets to a place where they don't need this rule anymore, but now they have the rule. Does that make sense?
Are you talking size like of the school, like
Well,
enrollment size?
Sure. Or I'm just saying, like, down the line, if there's something changes and this rule is written for class 2A schools,
Mhm.
but now class 2A schools don't really need it anymore or something. I'm just saying, like, because that seems to be the thing that would be subject to change is the classification, but maybe not.
Yeah, so we do have defined in another regulation the size for class 2A. And so I would think if we ever change, so I don't think a number needs to go in here because it's already defined elsewhere that it's a certain particular size of a school. However, I think if at any point there's changes to the classifications, like 1A to 5A, and those numbers change, that we would need to address anywhere where class 2A is in the reg to be sure that they still qualify or would need that particular regulation. So I think that's a good point. I don't think we need to change anything in this particular regulation since it is defined elsewhere, but it is a point to be made that if anything changes within that classification, size-wise, schools-wise, whatever, or even just that the league comes back and decides this is not beneficial, we no longer want this, need this, we could reevaluate it if we feel once it's in practice that it's not, what we're seeing as best for our schools in that classification. Other questions, comments?
Kate, my only concern with this, and I'm not opposed to it, I grew up with this type of a format, is how much longer until 3A asks for it, then the 4A is going to ask for it. And I can tell you right now, there are teams out there in the 5A that are going to want this. So my question would be, I think it goes along with size comment. Is it better to leave as is, or is it better to just remove the 2A and just go with the 6-quarter rule? Now, tracking a 6-quarter rule gets to be complicated. But at the same time, I can tell you right now that there are some 2A programs that have more kids involved in their program than some of our 4A programs do.
Yeah.
So I think that conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. And that was kind of what we had talked about prior with this is there's obviously small football programs. There's programs that have, 1,500, 2,000 kids at their school that aren't fielding freshmen and JV teams. But I think the argument went back to this is a need based on size versus a need based on the ability to have students come out, and that at least they have the opportunity with the number of students they have at their school. Whereas a 2A school doesn't necessarily have quite the number to fully field those two. And so I think that was really why we decided to keep it with the 2A only, because it doesn't apply to 1A since they just don't field the 2A the JV teams, and that 3A have successfully had JV programs without issue. 4A would be the only one I think would have a need just based on participation numbers, but it's not for a lack of having kids. So I see that it could open a can of worms. It could have more requests coming from other classifications. I will say this is the second time that this has been brought up and we haven't heard from anybody. There's been no push or public comment or anything from any other classifications, saying either this isn't fair or we also need to be considered or anything like that. So I think that's a good sign, is maybe they recognize that the need is in those smaller classifications, but it's also.
We have an application process for B team waivers, right?
Yeah. And so, but not for football. So when it comes to football, you're saying B team waivers as in older kids can play on the B team? Yeah.
Right. And I guess I'm just saying it's on an application basis. It's like,
right.
We have this situation. So is that, well, I guess I'm just saying that we have something similar to this that is just handled a different way, because if you're filling out that application for older kids to play down on the B team, it's because you have numbers issues. In order to keep the B team afloat, we're gonna put some sophomores down.
Mm-hmm.
So how would that coincide with this? Is that
I think Cy, the biggest difference between those two is in basketball and volleyball, there's no quarter limit. Football, one play constitutes a quarter, 4 quarters constitute a game. you can only play in one game. One play constitutes a game. Where this now is now going to say one play constitutes a quarter, and a student can calculate 6 quarters, as opposed to our current standard where football is one play constitutes a game. So that's it. You're in on a kickoff, you've played a game. So I think that would be the biggest variation from that. So I don't know if we would have to have the multi-level participation that we currently have. I don't know if that would apply here, because the game total then would also technically not change either. They're in 9 contests at the varsity level, or 9 contests at the JV level, because those contests happen within simultaneous. The other concern I have with the 6 quarter rule is the 5 sleeps in between contests. We may have a situation where you have a varsity game on a Thursday, and then you may have a JV game on a Saturday, and then you may come back the following week, and you may have a kid who could have played technically on Saturday, cannot play till Saturday night, Sunday night, Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night, cannot play until Thursday night. But if I have a game, so I'm the only concern I have with this is the tracking for the most part. And the last thing I'm going to say, Kate, and then I'll shut up, I promise, is this. In the last 2 years, I've answered this question more than any other question about football, because it's still an urban legend out there that this regulation exists for everybody.
Oh, yeah.
Literally had 5As all the way down to 2As call me on a Friday night and say, but Timmy hasn't played 6 quarters yet this week. So I think we got to really be careful on whether or not we bring it in. And I also think we have to be very careful if we bring it in, how we implement it. That's my only concerns.
Yeah, and I think to bring up one point about the 7 consecutive days is why we put that piece in there. And that it can only be within 2 football games too. So, if they separate those games out over, a Saturday and then a Tuesday for the JV game, they will then have, right, like those 5 sleeps until their next game. Like it'll be a scheduling piece. So they'll have to, and they've talked about this. I think they talked about it last year in this meeting, is that they may need to adjust their scheduling of their JV and varsity games to ensure that, it kind of fits within the mold, and that, kids aren't playing in like 3 games within a week, based on that. So that was a good point though, too. Tammy.
Is there a way, and I know this might open it up a little bit because I know Tim's concern, I feel like, is a very valid concern. Is there a way that we could open it up so that it's an option, but that it's that it's very closely, I mean, because again, I don't know who would be the one tracking it. Like Tim said, the tracking portion, is it, because those smaller schools are sometimes their own counties, right? Mm-hmm. So is there a way to allow it? Because I don't want to stop them from being able to do it, but then regulating the tracking.
Yeah, I mean, kind of the size point, it could be something like adding they have to submit basically, right, that they're going to be doing this. But I think it could change from week to week on like which kids are doing it, how many kids are doing it. So I don't know if it's like, yeah, we're going to do it and it's going to be these kids doing it these game. I don't know if that would kind of be too much of a tracking, or just that they're going to be doing it. And then, maybe each school has to track it independently, and it be some kind of like shared document in the league, so everyone sees the kids that are doing it and they can kind of see it, real time, and look at the jersey numbers and make sure. I don't know, that would be kind of FERPA with the kids' names, but maybe at least just jersey numbers or something. I don't know. They're definitely, and they are aware of this, and they want to create something because they don't want to see it being abused. So I know that they are aware that there needs to be some form of tracking. Grandy?
As far as tracking, I would, in my mind, I would go straight to like counting baseball and pitch counts, and they have the Google form they submit, and all the coaches can see, so they can verify each other. I think it would have to be something along those lines, so that there is checking amongst programs. Unfortunately, my kind of concern, and these are going to be rhetorical because I'm sure you probably don't have this, is one, do we know the injury concussion rates for those 2A programs currently?
Yeah.
And also the other states that do this, to look at their injury concussion rates and that kind of stuff. Because as much as we want to give kids opportunity, football's a violent sport. Yeah. And are we giving them more opportunity for more catastrophic injury rather than more opportunity to play? That's kind of my concern. And especially I had that note over a week ago, before Dr. Hughes spoke to us at NATA last week about the history of concussions in Nevada. So
Definitely.
that's just a definitely concern I have in pushing this forward, is
Yeah.
the medical well-being of the kids.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't have any of the, we don't track any of that, so I don't have any of that specific information, but those schools may have, more that they could provide input on with that. But I do know other states do it and have done it for a while. So at least we have kind of that it seems to be successfully occurring in other states. But I mean, definitely concern would be safety. I do know when they presented last time, their piece was sometimes they just need to throw a kid in for a couple plays here and there, give a couple kids a break, and then they're just out. And that was like the piece where it's like the kid barely played, but he played in a couple downs, so now he's out for the JV game or whatever the case was. And so and that's with the best intentions. Those are teams with the best intentions. So we know that there's a possibility it could be abused, where then safety is obviously the biggest concern. But I think if the tracking is good, and it's specific enough to know how much those kids are playing, or in some amount of number of downs or whatever it is, just to kind of know, or the number of actual quarters, they're the same kids playing 6 full quarters every time that they're playing in these 2 games. That's, to me, seems like they're overdoing it, they're abusing it, and that's a safety concern.
It's no different than our current multi-level participation, and that it's got the best intentions, but we know schools have there's the top scorer on JV and varsity.
Yeah, and that's their biggest concern. They know that there's issues with the multi-level and other, especially in like the 3A. They hear it a lot in the northern Nevada. There's a lot of 3A issues with multi-level, and I know that they're aware of that, and they want to ensure that that doesn't happen. So, they're working on something to ensure that it's tracked properly. But I don't have what that looks like. So maybe that's, don't like pushing things down further. We do have support. I do, see the benefit to it, but there's also some concerns with it, and the tracking piece is definitely one of them. So I don't know. I'm going to leave that up to you guys, how you want to move forward with this or not. But I did want to bring it back because it was something we've been sitting on for a bit, and I want to make sure we're talking about it again. Other comments, questions?
Well, it seems similar to the cheer regulations. I mean, we're trying to push this forward as this is how it would be written should it go into regulation. The committee does not have a consensus on whether or not this is what's best for the 2A or football in general, or the regulations going forward.
Yeah, and that it would be something that we kind of need to see. I think see it to know if it's what's best for us. I think we have enough data that other states are doing it, that at least we're not the first to do it. So we're not like pulling the Band-Aid off of something we have absolutely no idea what it's going to be like. I think it is operating successfully in other places, but is it what's best for us? I'm not sure. Other thoughts?
Just to piggyback on what Sai said there, if we do push it on, then at the board meeting, hopefully there'd be more comment.
Yeah, and I will definitely have at least Mackenzie over that brought this from Battle Mountain bring this. I think I would have him come because he spoke on this last time, and he did a good job kind of articulating the purpose and what they view it as. And Ken will be there, and Ken was led the conversation at NATA about this, so hopefully Ken will speak on it as well. So I think we'll have hopefully some people, and I will definitely ask anybody else in the 2A that wants to come and speak on it, good or bad, to provide that commentary, to the board as well. I think it's something that we're seeing definitely some support from their classification for. So, I want to at least have the conversation with the board so that they understand that this is something they want. But I agree. Like, if we want to push this forward, I think we say it as, we're not 100% sure that this is what what is best, but it's something that they are all kind of on almost a consensus of what they would like. So at least to have that conversation. Anything else? Okay, if not, I would entertain a motion. If nobody wishes to give a motion, then we will move on and not bring this forth to the board. But I will open that up to you guys to decide. And I'll say too, if we don't want to bring this regulation forth as a workshop approved item, I can also just put it on the board agenda as a discussion item so that they know that we've been having this discussion to see if they have a feeling of wanting to move forward with a regulation too. So that's also an option here. We don't have to actually push it forth as an approved regulation that we feel. So that's
I feel like I would be more comfortable with that one.
Same here.
okay. Do you want to make a motion to just put this on the agenda just to
Sure.
direct you to do so?
Sure. I would like to make a motion asking you to put this on the board agenda to see if there is a flavor for it to be a regulation.
Okay.
For the April.
I'll second.
Okay. Thank you. Any other discussion? Okay. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed. Okay, so I will put this on the agenda as a discussion piece only with some language, at least just to show them as a draft, not something that we approved. So it will not be part of workshop. It will not be something they can take action on. And then they can decide from there if they want to move forward. I think that's a good place to start. And then we can bring the two-way people in to talk about it more as well. Thanks for that, guys. All right, moving on to 7G, our last regulation is 708. This is actually something that was asked by the board to bring back to us, as it's something in the September board meeting that they decided we should not be meddling in middle school academics, and we did not move forward with this regulation. I put this back on, written exactly the way that we had it in September. Reason being is we had a level 2 hearing this year where a student was deemed ineligible their senior year due to taking 8th grade a second time. During that second 8th grade year, they took all high school coursework, advanced high school coursework, honors courses and such, and had passed everything the first 8th grade year successfully, had passed everything the second 8th grade year successfully, and then was officially put into 9th grade in the Clark County School District prior to their new processes. This was years ago because he was a senior this year. And he was put into the 9th grade and had already had 6 credits of high school under his belt going into 9th grade. I deemed him ineligible based on my understanding that, listen, you started 9th grade because you started 9th grade coursework in a repeated year. That's my view, is if you're going to repeat a year, you're repeating because of you're repeating the grade, you're repeating those classes, you're repeating 8th grade. So we'd only had done this for any student that actually took high school credit in that repeated year. And in that level 2, the hearing officer stated that the school allowed that student to enroll as a 9th grader. That was when their 9th grade started. And it didn't matter what they did in 8th grade because our regulations don't say anything about that. They were enrolled in 9th grade. They were enrolled in 10th grade the next year, 11th grade the next year, and 12th grade this year, and they are eligible as a 12th grader. And so I brought that up at the board meeting to let them know that this had happened and just to see if they wanted to, discuss this regulation again. And all that this is saying is basically if you do get retained in middle school for any other reasons beside academic failure, obviously we can see that in a middle school transcript. If they failed and they were retained and retook their 8th grade coursework, or in 7th grade or 6th grade, they failed and retook the same grade coursework because they failed those classes, didn't meet, the requirements to be moved on to the next grade, that's fine. But for any other reason, if it's not due to academic failure based on their grades on their transcript, and they are enrolled in one or more high school courses during that period of retention, they will then be considered as beginning their 8 consecutive semesters of eligibility. And so that is what we had proposed the first time. We'd all kind of agreed in this committee that that language was good and felt that it was only specific to any kid that repeated and took high school, because that, in our eyes, was, we felt they're kind of cheating the system. They're taking the high school courses without being a high schooler. Obviously, CCSD specifically has come up with a way to, curb this behavior by putting those kids in 10th grade based on their cohort age and all of that. But that's not the same for every public school district, charters, and privates. And so to put something in regulation would try to even the playing field. We have a district that's trying to address it and doing that, but that's not, kind of equitable across the state if we don't have something in regulation to also protect us from kids continuing to do this. So that being said, this was the original language. If there is any questions on this discussion, I just want to kind of hear what you guys feel. It was something we agreed to push forward that the board pushed back on us. So I wanted to see if our minds have changed on this, or if we want to push this back to the board again for discussion for them.
Well, my main thing, and I had written it down when I read through this, was the most vague part is or maybe it's not vague and I'm just don't know, but the high school courses part, is there a list of high school courses that are considered high school? Because like kids take health in 8th grade that is used as a high school credit. So like what courses are we talking about that are being considered high school courses?
Yeah, and I think this is only related to, it's only related to the retained year. So if you're getting held back. So if you're talking a 6th, 7th, 8th grader that's in their normal cohort and they're taking high school courses because they're advanced, or they're taking health, or they're taking computers and they're getting high school credit, they do not fall under this because they're not being retained. This is a situation where a kid is being retained and then taking these courses. So, typically they would take that health in their first 8th grade year, not knowing they're already going to hold themselves back. And so that wouldn't make them ineligible based on this because they're not taking it in the retained year. The retained year is really the only year that we're worried about. So if they're doing it in that retained 8th grade year and they're starting to take the advanced courses in anything high school related, it would be any course, because that now you are getting an extra year and getting credit for high school during that year when you didn't fail. You're not being held back by school rules. So yeah, it's not specified there because there's a wide range, obviously, of high school courses, but it is only related to that year that they get retained. Do you think? Oh, you're muted. Sorry.
You said in the retained year, any course? Is that what you said?
Any high school course, yeah, during the retained year.
Right,
So
because their retained year, they should be retaking all of their 8th grade courses, right? They shouldn't be taking any 9th grade courses because they failed 8th grade. So yeah, okay.
yeah. And I think that, the reasons we're hearing why they're keeping their kids back, it's like, oh, they're not emotionally ready. And that's fine. If they didn't fail and a parent makes an academic choice to hold their kid back, they truly don't feel like they're ready. Who am I to say that? I don't know that child personally. But that being said, they shouldn't then just get a full course load of high school courses to again be ahead. They should be taking the same courses over again, or courses in middle school if they're trying to keep their kid in middle school. It's kind of, can't have your cake and eat it too situation where you can't hold your kid back from high school, but then start all the high school courses. And that's kind of the purpose of this is you have the right as a parent to make that academic choice, but in that choice, you need to stay in middle school and take middle school courses.
Yeah, I view it as any class during that 2nd, 8th grade year that then appeared on their high school transcript.
Yep.
So
exactly.
So your registrar says, yep, that's a high school credit, and you took it during an 8th grade year that you didn't repeat due to failure, then it would be there. With that, people are, because we've seen them, and Kate and I both seen them, where 6th grade they did pre-algebra, 7th grade they took algebra, 8th grade they took geometry too. So they have 2 high school math credits before they leave 8th grade. They repeat 8th grade and they take pre-algebra again. We've seen that. The one thing I do like in this, Kate, is the word enrolled in high school credit course, because we've also had kids in that 2nd, 8th grade year enrolled in Health 9, but then not take the class. So they didn't do any work in that class knowing that they didn't want to actually earn high school credit. But this enrolled kind of eliminates that loophole. So if they're going to a school that enrolls them in a high school credit, whether they do the work or not during that year, it would kind of hold them to this.
I don't know if that would work in legal.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, unless anybody else has anything to say, I'd definitely be willing to make a motion to take this to the board again.
Motion in the
all right, I'll make a motion to take 387B 708 participation with the middle school credits back to the board to see what the flavor is.
I'll second.
Thanks, Reggie.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions, comments? Anybody else have anything about this before we go to vote? All right. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right. We will move that forward. I'll have to double check. I don't know that we need to bring it back to a workshop since it has been workshopped before. If we can just bring it back as an action item, but I'll figure out the logistics of it. We will bring it back one way or another to the board. And that is it. So going to item 8, we're looking at future items here. So please let me know if there's anything that's come up recently or anything that you feel we need to discuss at a future rules regulations meeting. at this time, I won't plan our next meeting unless we have something urgent that we want to get on before the end of the school year. We'll kind of just wait and see what happens maybe at our board meeting to see if there's anything we need to urgently talk about after that in the end of April or May. But if not, we may not meet again this year. I don't just meet to meet, so we'll meet if we need to, unless anybody has any items they want to add here that for like this year to talk about.
Where are we at with the 19-year-old rule?
Great question. I actually had to reach out to Paul about it because we submitted that in January of last year. So I'm going to personally reach out to my contacts of the LCB and just nudge a little and say, hey, this what he did submit it. So I have the paperwork to show it was submitted. I just want to make sure it wasn't missed on our end. It was submitted and we just never got it back. We never got it as a file number or anything with the LCB. So I want to just check on it. It might have just got lost in the shuffle with obviously all the things that happened last year with the transfer rules and things like that. So I will double check on that, but it is currently with them supposedly, and we will hopefully get an answer to that question very soon.
Do we have that documented somewhere as it was written, as it was submitted? Is that
It's it's in our board packet. It's in a board packet and an RP packet. From if you look at the board packet from January 2025, it should be in that board packet. And if I'm wrong, I'll email you, but I'm positive that's when we proved it because I remember sending that to him. Yep. Anything else? Any other questions, future items that we want to discuss? Okay, not hearing anything. So we'll wait till the board meeting and see where we need to go with anything else. And plan another meeting when and if we need one after that meeting, or if anything comes up before then, I will definitely let you all know. All right, moving to item 9, public comment. This time provides an opportunity for citizens to address the committee about any matter not on the agenda. Items raised during this portion of the agenda cannot be deliberated or acted upon. Should a member of the public wish to speak on a matter not listed on the agenda, it is asked that said person please complete a green public comment card and submit it to the committee chair prior to the opening of this item. Limit of 3 minutes per person and or 5 minutes for the spokesperson of a particular group may be imposed. It is requested that comments be directed to the committee as a whole. Comments that are determined to be irrelevant, repetitious, offensive, inflammatory, willfully disruptive, or deemed to be personal attacks will not be permitted. Do we have anybody anywhere with public comment?
No.
Perfect. Thank you. I have nothing. I'm sure my inbox is full, but if they didn't get it to me before the deadline, it's not going to get read here. We're going to move to adjourn then. We'll go ahead and close the meeting up at 11:42. I appreciate everybody's time and look forward to anybody either that's already going to be at the board meeting or willing to come to the board meeting or speak to come discuss some of those items that we talked about today. So thanks for all of your work today. I know it was a lot. Appreciate you all.